Hello, and welcome to this clean historical Western romance by Martha Gillcrest. It's great to have you with us. Before we begin, be sure to hit the subscribe button, give this audiobook a thumbs up, and share it with friends. Supporting us in this simple way allows us to share more heartwarming romance stories with you for free. Now get cozy, relax, and escape into adventure and love with a host of new characters. Enjoy. The following book is the copyright of Martha Gillcrest. The Bride in the Blizzard by Martha Gillcrest. Chapter 1. New York, December 24th, 1868. Beth Wilson watched the flames lick up the chimney as they took hold of the coal she had just added to the fire. They mesmerized her, shimmering blue and orange by turn, and the crackling sound comforted her as she warmed her hands. Outside, the snow had been falling all afternoon, muffling the usual rumble of carriages and wagons on the streets. St. Giles's Lane, where the Wilson family lived, was on the edge of an affluent part of New York. Close enough for Patrick Wilson to walk briskly to the bank where he worked as a manager without too much trouble, but not so well-to-do that they would forget their humble beginnings, his wife, Hazel, liked to say. Suddenly, a loud hammering on the front door snatched Beth from her daydreams, and she jumped up and ran out into the hallway. "Open up, it's perishing cold out here," a loud voice called. Beth flung the door open to be greeted by a blast of icy air and the scent of pine resin. "You got a tree," she cried. Her brother, Owen, chuckled from behind the prickly green branches. "I promised I would, and since when did I ever let you down, Beth?" He squeezed through the door and manhandled the tree into the corner of the front parlor, while Beth clapped her hands excitedly. "Goodness me, Owen. When you said you would try to bring a Christmas tree home from the market, I thought it would be something a little smaller." Hazel Wilson bustled from the kitchen where she was busy preparing food, her cheeks flushed rosy red from the heat of the stove. "It's a bit bare on one side, Ma, so nobody else wanted it. Bert said if we couldn't sell it, he would happily let me have it for half a day's wages." Owen twisted the tree to disguise the branches that were damaged, and secured it in place with some stacked-up logs of wood that he had already chopped the day before. "I think it's perfect," Beth said stoutly. "It would have been a shame to leave it out with the rotten cabbage leaves like a piece of trash just because it wasn't as good as the other trees." Hazel gave her 8-year-old daughter a fond look. Beth had a keen sense of fairness and always wanted to make sure folks were treated equally. It was a trait she encouraged, even though some of the neighbors mistook it for being too soft, warning Hazel that Beth might be taken advantage of when she grew into a woman if she wasn't careful. "I'd rather raise Beth to care about those less fortunate, as the Lord tells us to, than to be self-serving and only care about herself," Hazel thought to herself. "Now all we need to do is decorate it," Owen said with a grin. Even though he was 5 years older than Beth, he was just as excited as she was about the festivities they would enjoy the following day, and his eyes lit up as Beth scurried over to the basket next to the sideboard. "I've made dried orange slices and strings of popcorn and some paper stars as well." She pulled the decorations out, and they stood side by side, placing them carefully on the fragrant pine branches. "I hope I haven't missed all the fun." Patrick Wilson paused in the doorway, feeling his heart swell with happiness at the cozy scene in front of him. "Pa, you're home!" Beth darted over and threw her arms around him before helping him out of his tweed overcoat. His graying hair was dusted with snow, and he blinked owlishly in the lamplight. His eyesight was getting worse from long days poring over ledgers, but Beth didn't notice old age creeping up on her beloved parents. She was just happy to have everyone together and glad that her pa had a couple of days off work to spend with them. "Will you have a nice cup of tea and warm up by the fire, dear?" Hazel followed him into the parlor, already carrying a tray with a teapot and 4 cups, as well as a plate of cinnamon cookies that Beth had baked earlier. "God certainly blessed me the day we met." Patrick sighed gratefully as he sank into his armchair, and Hazel passed around cups of tea for everyone. Hazel blushed. "I could say the same thing," she replied with a shy smile. "Although marriage was the last thing on my mind when we met, seeing as we were only 10 years old," she added with a chuckle. If you hadn't picked up my bonnet that windy day when I was walking home from church, life might have turned out very differently. Call it fate or coincidence, if you will, but I believe the Lord always has a plan when it comes to falling in love, Patrick said with a twinkle in his eye. He watched Beth standing on her tiptoes to drape a piece of tinsel on the tree with fatherly pride. She reminded him of Hazel when they had first met, with the same gleaming chestnut-colored curls and big blue eyes. She would grow up to be just as beautiful as her mother, which gave him a ripple of concern because he knew that there were plenty of men who would have dishonorable intentions in the future, given half a chance. Patrick felt a sudden sense of fear that he might not live long enough to see his children happily married and with families of their own. The usual winter influenza had swept through the city, taking a few of his acquaintances to an early grave, and he shivered at the thought that it might come to their home too. "Let me help you with that. You're far too short," Owen said. He picked Beth up, making her giggle, so she could reach further up the tree to tie some red ribbons on it, and Patrick instantly felt happier. His son had been raised right and would always look out for Beth's well-being. No matter what happened, he was sure. "Are you tired, Patrick?" Hazel perched on the arm of the chair and squeezed his hand, sensing his worries. She knew that her husband would do anything for his family, unlike many other men who would rather spend their money in the saloon than go home to their wives. "Not now that I'm home with you and the children, my dear," Patrick said, shaking off his melancholy thoughts. "Beth, if you go and look in my coat pocket, I have a surprise for you." Beth scurried away and returned a moment later, carrying a parcel wrapped in brown paper and string. "What is it, Pa? Should we save it for tomorrow?" "Definitely not. Open it now and then we'll have longer to enjoy it," he said mysteriously. Beth carefully untied the string, and the paper fell open to reveal a beautiful glass star that twinkled as it reflected the lamplight on its edges. "It's beautiful," she exclaimed. She passed it carefully to Owen so he could put it at the top of the tree and then stood back to admire the finished result. "This is the most perfect Christmas I could ever have wished for." Patrick slipped his arm around Hazel's waist, and they exchanged a knowing look. Both of them had grown up knowing hardship, and he had worked hard to provide a better life for his own family. But more importantly, he had always vowed that he would never be the sort of cold-hearted man his father had been, quick to lose his temper at the slightest excuse, and always ready to discipline Patrick and his younger sister with harsh punishments and scornful put-downs. Both Patrick and Hazel's parents had died before Beth was born. He was grateful that she had only ever known kindness and love, and prayed that Owen wouldn't inherit his grandfather's ill-tempered demeanor, which had always shown up when he drank strong liquor. "I think it's time for us to get dinner ready," Hazel said, standing up again. "Let's go and set the table, Beth, while your pa has a rest for a little while. He works so hard, he deserves to relax and enjoy the fire." The mouth-watering smell of baked ham was already wafting from the kitchen, as well as the scent of festive spices from the plum pudding, which she had fetched from the pantry where it had been stored for the last few weeks. Half an hour later, Patrick sat at the head of the table, and they all folded their hands. "Dear Lord, we thank you for such great blessings, for the roof over our head, delicious food on our table, and for bestowing your grace over this family. We repent of our sins and pray for your mercy as you watch over us this winter, keeping us safe from illness and guiding us to help those who are less fortunate. Amen." A sense of contentment filled Beth's heart as she looked up from her prayer and caught her pa and ma smiling lovingly across the table at one another. She knew she was lucky to have such a close-knit family when so many folks were troubled by illness and poverty in the city. "You'll never guess what happened today at the market," Owen piped up. He had been working as a costermonger with Bert Brightwell for almost a year and delighted in entertaining them with stories about the folks he encountered during his day. As he regaled them with tales of maids out doing last-minute errands for their mistresses and the latest escapades of the light-fingered pickpockets running rings around the constables, Beth wished she could make the evening last forever. It was so wonderful. "Would you like a cup of coffee to finish?" Hazel poured a cup anyway and passed it to Patrick, as was their habit. "Will you tell us the story, Pa?" Beth asked. The clock ticked on the mantel, and she was already feeling sleepy, but she was determined to stay awake for her favorite part of Christmas Eve. "What story would that be?" Patrick replied, looking puzzled. "Don't tease her," Hazel said, making him chuckle. "Oh, that story." Patrick sipped his coffee and then put his cup down. "Are you sure you're not too tired?" "Never, Pa. It's our tradition. Please?" "Very well." Patrick gave her a smile, grateful to have the chance to make his daughter happy, and she went around the table to sit next to him. "One winter's day, when I was just a young boy, the church where my family used to worship was closed because a storm had damaged the roof, so we decided to go to one on the other side of the neighborhood instead. And at the end of the service, just as I came outside, a gust of wind caught someone's hat and blew it right over the wall." He glanced across at Hazel and gave her a gentle smile as Beth sighed happily. She loved to hear about how her parents had met, never tiring of hearing the story every year. "And when I asked your ma to marry me a few years later," he continued, "we made each other a promise. We said that we would always cherish each other, and if the Lord blessed us with children, we would always love them and raise them in a happy home." The coals had burned down to glowing embers by the time Patrick quietly finished his story, and Beth yawned, snuggling in against him. "We'll always be together, Pa, won't we?" she whispered. "Yes, Beth, there's no need to worry. We'll always be together and look out for each other. That's what families do." Chapter 2. New York, December 1878. 10 years later. Beth warily pushed the damp curls back from her forehead and added more wood to the fire under the copper tub she used for their laundry. The water bubbled inside, and she stirred the bedsheets with a wooden paddle, trying to rid them of the lingering stench of sickness. Her arms ached, but it was a small price to pay for helping her pa, and she gritted her teeth, determined to carry on. "Look after your pa and Owen, Beth. They will need your help more than ever once I'm gone." She could still hear her mother's gasping words in her head from a few short weeks ago, and it brought tears to her eyes. Hazel had succumbed to the terrible wave of influenza that pervaded the dank streets and back alleys of New York faster than Beth could believe possible. First, she had complained of not being able to get warm, but as winter had arrived early that year, everyone had been grumbling about the icy winds, and Beth had thought that an extra shawl around Hazel's thin shoulders would suffice. Owen had hurried home from the market as early as he could each day, bringing an extra sack of coal from his earnings, but within a matter of days, Hazel couldn't get out of bed. The fever racked her body, alternating between raging heat and clammy chills, and Beth had scurried to do her chores as quickly as possible so she could spend more time sitting by her bed and gently mopping her brow with a lavender compress. In her last moments, Hazel had summoned the strength to take Beth's hand in her own and squeeze it tightly, wanting to make sure her daughter would listen to her parting words. "Your pa and I were so lucky to meet each other, Beth. Don't ever give up on love, my dear girl. I pray that you will find a husband who will cherish you as much as I have been cherished, and that you will know the joy of having a family, in the same way that you and Owen have brought me so much joy." Hazel's eyes had brimmed with tears as she saw Beth's anguished expression. "I don't want to lose you, Ma," Beth had whispered. She was 18 years old, but the thought of losing her mother was almost too much to bear. "Don't be sad, Beth. The Lord is calling me to his side, and I know you will always hold me in your prayers. Stay true to your faith and be a good person like we've raised you. You've grown into a fine young woman, and I'm very proud of you." Beth had rushed downstairs to fetch Owen and Patrick, and a few minutes later, Hazel's life had quietly ebbed away. As if that wasn't bad enough, a week ago, Patrick had woken in the night drenched in sweat, calling weakly for Beth. And sure enough, the doctor had confirmed the following morning that he had influenza as well. Since then, Beth had toiled day and night to keep her father comfortable, changing the tangled sheets, feeding him nourishing broth, and praying during every spare moment she had. A gust of cold air and the sound of heavy footsteps told her that Owen was back from the market, and she turned around to smile at him as he tramped through the kitchen to find her. "I think Pa's temperature is a little better today," she said. "I'm giving him stewed fruit from what you brought home and praying that maybe he's turned a corner." Owen dropped a box of bruised apples onto the table and then shrugged off his coat. "That's a relief to hear. I could do with some good news. We didn't do very well on the stall today. Folks are staying at home, worried about catching this wretched illness or slipping on the ice." "In that case, can you thank Bert for the apples?" Beth said. "It's kind of him to let us have them when times are hard for his family as well. You were lucky to get that job, Owen." Her brother gave her a look that was hard to read. "Are you saying that so I don't leave the market and try for something better?" "No, it's just that we need every penny you can earn now that Pa's laid up in bed," Beth said hastily. "I know you wanted to try and become a clerk working in the bank like Pa, and I'm sure he'll put in a good word for you as soon as he's well again." "I never imagined I would still be selling vegetables for a living now that I'm almost 23 years old." Owen's eyes clouded with disappointment at his lot in life. "It's nothing to be ashamed of," Beth said stoutly. "You work harder than anyone I know, and just because it's not in an office doesn't mean it's less of a job. Bert told me how much the regular customers like you because you take good care of them." Owen picked up one of the apples and polished it on his sleeve before taking a large bite out of it, and then grinned at her. "The young maids always enjoy it when I pay them a compliment. It doesn't cost anything to be pleasant, and I can usually persuade them to buy a couple of extras, which pleases Bert. Don't mind me, Beth. I'm just worried about Pa. Goodness knows how we would manage if he doesn't get well." "He will get well." Beth's voice was firm, and she started putting the sheets through the mangle with renewed vigor. She wasn't prepared to think about losing both parents. It was unimaginable. Later that evening, Beth hummed as she took a nourishing bowl of beef broth upstairs for Patrick. She had baked fresh bread to go with it, hoping to tempt him to eat more, even though he kept saying he had no appetite. "How are you feeling now, Pa?" she asked softly as she pushed the bedroom door open. The lamps were turned low so he could sleep, but as soon as Beth saw her father, she knew his condition had taken a turn for the worse within the last couple of hours. His breathing was labored, and his skin looked almost translucent. She put the tray down and rushed to his side, pressing her hand against his forehead. He was burning up, but his eyes fluttered open as he realized she was there. "Fetch Owen," he croaked. "I don't have long, and I need to speak to you both." "Don't say that, Pa," Beth pleaded. "We'll nurse you back to good health, I promise." She spun around and raced down the stairs, returning with Owen a moment later. Owen looked shocked at the sight that greeted him, and he reached for Beth's hand as they approached their father. Patrick gave them a faint smile. "There's no point pretending I'm getting better. I will soon be reunited with Hazel, and if this is the Lord's will, then I am comforted to know it's my time." Beth perched on the edge of his bed and gently held a glass to his lips so he could sip some water. Her eyes pricked with unshed tears, but she blinked them back so that he wouldn't see her distress. She didn't want to upset him, not when they only had a precious few minutes left together on this earth. "I want you to promise me that you will take care of each other," Patrick said, his voice growing fainter. Owen leaned closer to catch his words. "Of course, Pa. You don't have to tell us that. It's how you raised us. Protect Beth from unscrupulous men." Patrick held Owen's gaze. "Do you understand what I'm saying? She's a beauty, like her ma was, and I want to know that she, and you too, Owen, will be happy in your marriages, even though I won't be here to see it happen." Owen nodded firmly. "You have my word, Pa. I've seen how some of the men behave, ruining a woman's reputation, and you can be sure I won't allow that to happen to Beth." Patrick seemed relieved to hear the words spoken aloud, and he twitched his fingers for them to hold his hands. "I'm sorry I haven't been able to leave you better provided for, but if you both work hard, you should get by." His voice was growing fainter, and a tear rolled down Beth's cheek. "You and Ma gave us a very happy upbringing, Pa, and that's what matters. We might not have had fancy clothes, but we had each other," she whispered. The clock ticked quietly on the mantel. And Owen and Beth sat on their chairs on either side of Patrick's bed as the minutes slipped by. Beth lowered her head to pray. Not that her pa's life would be spared, for she knew it was too late for that, but to give thanks for the blessings of the happier memories of times gone by. Life would be difficult without her parents to turn to, but Beth knew there would be time enough in the future to think about that. As the night sky darkened outside and the wind blew a sudden flurry of icy hail against the window, a deepening silence within the room told Beth that her beloved parents were both gone forever. The tears tracked down her cheeks as she realized life would never be the same again. Chapter 3. New York, Spring 1880. "I've left a ham roll for you on the kitchen table," Beth called up the stairs. Owen stood at the top, scratching his chin with a bleary expression. "Mind you, come straight home when Miss Hall closes the store." "I was only late yesterday because Vera and I walked home via the park. It was such a lovely day, we wanted to spend some time outside." "Talking to strangers, no doubt," Owen retorted. He walked slowly down the stairs, giving Beth a stern look. "You know I told you not to spend too much time with Vera. That girl has got her head in the clouds, and she's a bad influence on you. I saw her talking with a gentleman outside the saloon on the other side of the market last week. I don't want you mixed up with that sort of behavior, Beth. You know what Pa said on his deathbed." Beth bit back the reply that had been on the tip of her tongue. She wanted to tell Owen that Vera was just being friendly and was probably offering her last few coins to someone down on their luck, but she knew he wouldn't listen to her explanation. Anytime Owen sensed she was stepping out of line, he would remind her that their Pa had charged him with protecting her virtue. Just the mention of Patrick's dying wish brought all the sadness of losing their parents flooding back, and Beth sighed wearily, not wanting to fall out with Owen again. "I'll walk straight home," she said quietly. "Will you be back in time for us to have supper together tonight?" "Maybe," Owen muttered. "I might have to do a bit of business after work finishes." "Going drinking at the saloon, you mean?" Beth couldn't help herself, although she regretted it the moment the words left her mouth. "Someone has to keep the money coming in, dear sister," Owen shot back. "If going to the saloon means I can earn a few extra coins running errands for the gentlemen I meet there, you should be grateful, not scolding me like a nagging wife." His tone was laced with sarcasm, and he pushed past her without quite meeting her eye. "I'm sorry my job doesn't bring in more money. I'd better get going. I don't want to be late." Beth tied her shawl over her shoulders and put her bonnet on, feeling a sense of disappointment as she watched Owen's retreating figure. He didn't bother to say goodbye, and she tried not to take it personally. It's just the pressure of keeping a roof over our heads. The thought was little comfort to Beth as she hurried through the back streets past St. Giles's Park on her way to work, because she knew it was more than that. Over a year had passed since Patrick's death, and she barely recognized her brother anymore. It was as if the disappointment of being stuck in his job at the market had soured any pride he took in his work. At first, Beth had assumed the evenings he came home late were because Bert had asked him to stay on a few extra hours, but the smell of stale whiskey and his erratic mood changes soon told her otherwise. Owen had turned into everything his father had most feared. Taking after his grandfather by turning away from God and finding solace in the bottom of a whiskey bottle instead. The Wilsons' happy family home became a distant memory, even though Beth did whatever she could to keep the place cozy, hoping that Owen would come around and return to the gentle, kind man she knew he could be. Her thoughts were troubling her so much that she barely noticed the first spring flowers pushing through the soil in the gardens she passed, which usually cheered her up. "Beth, wait for me!" A cheerful voice behind her made Beth turn around. She smiled as a red-haired young woman ran toward her, shawl flying out behind her, with a mischievous look in her eyes. "Good morning, Vera. I was hoping I might see you, and we could walk to work together." Beth waited for her friend to catch up, and they fell into step together. "I overslept. Didn't even have time for a cup of coffee to help me wake up." Vera chattered loudly, oblivious to several clerks turning to look at the two of them with admiring glances. Beth, with her understated beauty, and Vera, with her bubbly personality, made an attractive pair, and Beth nudged her in case they drew unwanted attention. "Hush, Vera. You're making folks stare at us. Owen has already told me off for walking home through the park yesterday." Vera tucked her hand into Beth's arm, seemingly unconcerned. "It's about time Owen realized you're 19 going on 20, Beth. He can't keep you hidden away forever. How will you meet a nice young man and get married if he won't even let you speak to anyone?" Beth smiled despite herself. Vera's comments about Owen were not meant unkindly, and there was an element of truth in what she said. "I think he must have spies posted at every corner of town," she said. "No matter where I go or what I do, he seems to know about it. That's why he approved of you working at Hall's haberdashery. He knows it's only ever ladies who come in to shop, and there's no chance of you catching the eye of an unsuitable man." Vera chuckled. She fluttered her eyelashes and did a twirl. "If only Owen weren't so dour, I wouldn't mind courting him myself. He's very handsome." "I think he's too busy working and drinking to think about romance," Beth replied as they turned onto Fisher's Lane, and the haberdashery came into view. Part of her wished Owen would fall in love with Vera, or at least the Owen she used to know. They would be well suited, and it would please her to see her brother and friend together. But there was no chance of that. It seemed like Owen had closed his heart off to love since their parents had died, and expected her to do the same. "Well, if Owen won't let you meet a nice gentleman from around here, perhaps I'll have to help you do it another way," Vera said. She gave Beth a wink as they pushed open the front door of the store. "We don't want you turning into a spinster like Ida," she whispered loudly. "Did I hear my name?" A plump woman looked up from the bolt of fabric she was measuring on the countertop. "No, Miss Hall," Beth said hastily. She was very fond of her employer and wouldn't want to say anything to hurt her feelings. "Shall I make you a cup of tea before we get too busy?" She hung up her shawl and tied a calico apron over her dress, ready to face the day ahead. "That would be lovely, dear. If you could continue with tidying the shelves, please, Vera. And Beth, you can carry on with the mending and dress alterations today." Ida Hall's gray curls bobbed as she nodded to the two young ladies she had taken on to help her with the business. She enjoyed their company because it kept her young at heart, and she smiled to herself as she thought about what she had overheard them talking about. Ida had once been very much in love, although it had never resulted in marriage, and she remembered only too well what it felt like to yearn for a kind-hearted husband. Vera came from a large family with older sisters to give her all the advice she needed about romance. But Beth was different, shy and still rather innocent. Ida couldn't help but feel rather maternal toward Beth, since finding out that she had lost her parents in quick succession. Although rumor had it that her brother ruled their house with the sort of discipline that could either make a woman want to rebel or crush her spirit. Either way, it didn't bode well for Beth's future happiness, which was a thought that had been giving Ida sleepless nights lately. "What's this for?" Beth asked as Vera slipped a newspaper into her basket at the end of the day. "It's kind of you, but I don't really have time to read when I get home. Owen expects a hot meal on the table by 7, regardless of whether he's home to eat it or not." She kept her voice light, but wondered whether Vera had even been paying attention when she had told her that Owen expected her to do all the household chores as well as her job at the haberdashery store. "Remember what we talked about this morning?" Vera's eyes sparkled with intrigue. "You know, about how you could meet the gentleman of your dreams?" Beth stepped around a drayman, rolling a barrel of beer toward the pub. The man paused to wipe the sweat from his brow and gave Vera a leering grin before continuing his task. "Yes, but what's that got to do with this newspaper?" "It's not a newspaper, Beth. It's the Matrimonial Times. My eldest sister, Tabitha, has just married the most delightful gentleman, and all because she answered an advertisement from the newspaper this time last year." Vera looked momentarily sad. "I do miss her, though. She's helping him run a boarding house in Montana now, but I'm happy for her." Beth couldn't hide her shock. "You're not expecting me to do the same, surely? I'd rather wait and meet somebody here in New York, Vera." Even as she spoke, She wondered how it would ever happen. Owen had made it perfectly clear she was not to attend dances, and he glowered angrily at any of the young men at their church who might be romantically interested in her. "I've been thinking about your situation," Vera continued, waving her concerns away. "I even asked my sisters for their advice. What did they say?" Beth blushed slightly at the thought of being discussed in Vera's noisy household, but wished she had older sisters she could turn to for help. "They all said this would be the perfect way for you to find a husband. You can take your time getting to know someone by writing letters to each other. And the best thing is that Owen need never know, at least not until you're ready to tell him you're engaged to be married. You can put your address as Ida's shop. She always asks me to pick up the mail so we can keep it secret." Beth shook her head instantly. "I can't lie to Owen, Vera. It wouldn't be right." Vera sighed and gave her friend a sympathetic look. "I figured you would say that. You're too nice for your own good, Beth. Are you sure Owen isn't just keeping you stuck at home because it's convenient to have you cooking and cleaning while he gallivants around town doing what he pleases? No, he's not like that. It's because he promised Pa that he would look out for me." Beth shivered slightly as a memory of Patrick's last moments returned to her mind. "Is it what your ma would have wanted?" Vera asked firmly. "I know my ma wants all her daughters to be happily married one day. She was worried about Tabitha meeting her beau this way, but everything turned out just fine." Beth remembered that her ma had said the same, and the memory filled her with sudden doubt about how Owen was treating her. Vera was right. His brotherly concern for her well-being had become more like wanting to control her every move lately. And it did suit him very well to have Beth acting as an unpaid maid, cook, and housekeeper while he frittered away his money at the saloon. As though sensing Beth's change of mood, Vera seized her opportunity. "Have a look at the advertisements tonight. It's the most recent copy of the newspaper, so I'm sure the gentleman advertising will still be looking for a bride." She gave her friend a nudge with her elbow and grinned. "I even had a quick peek at them myself when I bought it at lunchtime. There are ranchers, doctors, and even lawyers advertising in it. I don't see how Owen could say gentlemen like that aren't suitable for you, Beth. I'd write to one if my heart wasn't already pining for someone else." With a parting grin, she darted off down the road where she lived, leaving Beth, shaking her head in disbelief. Vera made everything sound so simple. Perhaps it might work. "I suppose I could just have a look," Beth muttered to herself as she hurried home. She knew that Vera's ma wouldn't have agreed to let Tabitha travel west to get married if it wasn't safe and respectable. In fact, the more she thought about it, the more appealing it seemed. Several women from the church she and Owen attended had also made similar journeys west to become mail-order brides because of the lack of women out in the frontier lands. Beth had been intrigued at the time, but had always assumed she would meet her future husband here in New York. "What should I do, Lord? Would Ma approve if I replied to an advertisement and started writing to someone?" As she often did, in times of indecision, Beth prayed, desperately hoping for some sort of sign or guidance that she was doing the right thing, or even a sense that she might feel something from her ma's spirit. Just as she rounded the corner and the family home came into view, a heavy shower of rain started falling. Beth pulled her shawl up and ran the last few hundred yards to the house, but before she could open the door, a sharp gust of wind snatched her bonnet from her head and sent it rolling out into the road. "Look out, miss. I almost flattened your hat." A wizened old man dropped the handles of his barrow and picked the bonnet up, handing it to her with a disgruntled expression. "This sort of wind does nobody any good. Makes folk stay at home instead of buying my fruit." He gave her an expectant look. "Thank you, sir. I'll have 2 oranges for your kindness." Beth handed him a coin in exchange for the fruit, even though she knew Owen would tell her it was an unnecessary extravagance when he could bring fruit home from the market. She gave the old man a smile as a rainbow appeared in the distance, arcing over the town as the sun came out again. "Good day to you," she called. Beth brushed the mud from her bonnet, struck by a sudden thought. Her pa had met her ma when her bonnet had blown away. Perhaps her own bonnet falling off in the wind was just the sign she had been looking for, that it was time to ignore Owen's overly restrictive rules and take her future into her own hands instead. Chapter 4. New York, Spring 1880. Beth hummed to herself as she pegged Owen's shirts on the washing line in their small backyard. This was the first spring day where the sun felt properly warm, and there was a light breeze which made it a good drying day, although she knew from experience that the weather could still revert to being more like winter. It was always fickle at this time of year, but nothing could dampen her spirits. She smiled as she recalled Vera's parting words to her on their way home. "Didn't I tell you he would write back again? He'll be a lucky man to have your hand in marriage, Beth, and don't you forget it." Beth chuckled as she reached for another shirt. Vera had gotten ahead of herself, but that was just her natural exuberance, whereas Beth was more cautious. True to her word, and after putting her initial skepticism to one side, Beth had looked through the advertisements in the Matrimonial Times a few weeks ago, and one had jumped out at her straight away. It was for a gentleman called John Green. His advertisement was short and to the point. He was a lawyer in a small frontier town called Rocky River in Wyoming, and because his work meant that he had to travel away, sometimes for weeks at a time, he hadn't been able to secure a bride in his local area. The advertisement went on to say that he was setting up an office, so he planned to be home plenty more in the future and looked forward to having a family with the right woman by his side. Much to Beth's delight, John had written straight back to her initial letter, replying to his advertisement. And yesterday, she had received a second letter from him, which Vera assured her meant that they were as good as courting. "A lawyer," Beth murmured to herself. "And he picked me to correspond with, from all the replies he received." Her pa had once said that he would introduce her to a client of his at the bank who was a lawyer, saying that he would make her a good husband. The fact that Mr. Green was in the same line of work made her hope that it was another sign that she was doing the right thing. She tried to imagine herself living in Wyoming, but it was almost impossible. She had only ever known this part of New York, where carriages rumbled through the streets day and night, and the sidewalks were always busy with people hurrying about their business. She knew their neighbors, of course, and the folks at church, but it was easy to feel anonymous if she traveled beyond the small neighborhood of her day-to-day existence. Mr. Green said in his letters that Rocky River was a small frontier town, mainly serving the miners and ranchers of the vast lands around it. The way he described it sounded nice to Beth, the sort of place where she would quickly get to know everyone and be part of a friendly community. It sounded like a far cry from the stifled existence that Owen was forcing her to live, and she felt her spirits rise as she picked up her washing basket to go back inside and start preparing dinner. "Why are you looking so pleased with yourself?" Owen mumbled. He was slouching at the kitchen table, and he gave her a suspicious look over his cup of coffee. "Is it against your rules to be happy?" Beth shot back. "The sun is shining, that's all." "You've been singing to yourself more than usual this last week. Is there something you should tell me?" Owen leaned back in his chair and folded his arms with a belligerent expression. Beth felt her good mood evaporate like the morning mist on a hot day. Owen had stayed out at the saloon until the early hours, and the kitchen reeked of stale whiskey. Suddenly, Beth was overcome with irritation and resentment at the way he was treating her. "I'm not a child, Owen," she said firmly. "I'm working as hard as I can at the haberdashery to bring in money to help toward the rent, and I do all the house chores, but nothing ever seems good enough for you these days." "What do you mean?" Owen leaned heavily on the table and pushed himself to his feet. "Pa told me to look out for you, and that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm old enough to make my own way in life. I'm almost 20, and Vera says you can't expect me to wait on you hand and foot forever. I deserve to get married. It's what Ma wanted for me. But there's no chance of that, while you won't even let me speak to a single gentleman who so much as looks at me." Beth's voice rose with frustration, and she gulped as she saw Owen's eyes darken with anger. "Vera, huh? I should have known she would fill your head with nonsense." Owen dug into his pocket and threw something down onto the table between them. I suppose it was her idea to get you writing to a man in Wyoming, was it? Beth gasped as she realized it was Mr. Green's latest letter. Have you been going through my belongings? It was right there in your basket, and it caught my eye. Owen's expression hardened as he refused to admit that he had been snooping. Turns out you've been keeping secrets from me, Beth, so it was perfectly justifiable for me to read the letter. Would you care to explain yourself? We're courting, Beth replied. She lifted her chin defiantly. He's a lawyer, so it's all completely respectable. They're short of women in the frontier towns, and I replied to his advertisement through a marriage bureau. Marriage? Owen scoffed. You think you can marry someone by writing a few letters? I won't allow it, Beth. You'll make a fool of yourself and come crawling back when it all goes wrong. But by then, your reputation will be ruined. You're just saying that because you don't want to lose your unpaid housekeeper, Beth cried. Tears pricked the back of her eyes as Owen snatched up the letter and tore it into tiny pieces. So you're ready to make your own way in life, are you? Owen sneered. In that case, you can leave right now. Pa would never have approved of this promiscuous behavior, writing sweet nothings to a man you've never even met. He wanted me to help you find a husband when the time was right. But if you reckon you can do a better job yourself, you can be on your way. But Mr. Green and I have only exchanged a couple of letters, Beth replied hastily. She had underestimated how angry Owen would be. And the red-faced man standing across the kitchen from her suddenly seemed like a complete stranger. Why are you being so cruel? Ever since you started going to the saloon, you've turned into a horrible person, Owen. What happened to behaving in a godly way, like Ma and Pa raised us? I'm not listening to any more of this nonsense. Owen picked up his coat and hat, not meeting her eye. If you won't abide by my rules, you can fend for yourself. You can't stop me writing to Mr. Green. Vera's sister is very happily married to someone she met exactly the same way. The marriage bureau is all proper and above board, and Mr. Green is very taken with me. I thought with him being a lawyer, you would be happy for me. Well, you thought wrong. I've given you a chance, but you're too stubborn and naive to realize that this could all end very badly for you, Beth. Owen strode out of the kitchen without so much as a backward glance. I want you gone from this house by the time I get home, he yelled from the hallway. The front door slammed behind him, making the walls judder, and Beth sank to her knees to pick up the scattered shreds of the letter. Hot tears ran down her cheeks, and she knew that this time there was no going back. Owen had given her an ultimatum, and he had made it clear that he would never approve of her getting married unless it was to a man of his choosing. But her heart was already set on a new beginning, far away in the West. Rent's due at the end of the week. Beth paused in the dingy stairwell as the landlord's voice echoed up from where he was standing at the bottom of the stairs. Thank you for reminding me, Mr. Tanner. I hadn't forgotten. Heavy footsteps followed her up the stairs, and she shivered. When Owen had thrown her out of their home, Beth had walked for hours trying to find a room to rent that she could afford on her meager budget. In the end, by pure coincidence, she had seen a woman dragging her belongings out of a dusty tenement building not far from Ida's store. Beth had asked if the room was available, and the woman had given her a curt nod, telling her that she wouldn't stay there another night, even if she were paid to do so. Beth had been so desperate to find lodgings that she hadn't questioned the strange reply, and an hour later, she had managed to secure the room for herself, although the rent was barely affordable. Why do you never have time to stop and chat with me, Miss Wilson? The other woman who had that room before you was much friendlier. Mr. Tanner could move surprisingly fast for a man of his bulk, and he was beside Beth just as she was putting the key in her door. I'm sorry, Mr. Tanner. I'm tired from a long day at work. Beth shrank back to maintain some distance between them. Even though she had only been in the tenement for a little over a week, he always seemed to stand closer than was polite, as though they were friends. And he had a way of licking his lips as he eyed her womanly figure that reminded her of the drunk men outside the saloon, leering at passing ladies. I get lonesome after Mrs. Tanner died, I wondered, what with you being alone as well, if we could be good company for each other." Mr. Tanner spoke in a wheedling tone, and his bloodshot eyes seemed sad, which made Beth feel a surge of pity for him. "A cup of coffee together would be nice, don't you think? The thing is, I have to put the rent up shortly, but perhaps I could keep yours at the current amount in return for some company." Beth's heart sank at his comment. She had budgeted her money carefully and could just about make ends meet, but not if he put the rent up. She glanced up and down the hallway. There was nobody else around, and she knew that most of the other tenants would stay in their rooms until it was time to go to work the following morning. She wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt that his request for friendship was innocent, but then she remembered Owen's scornful comment about how she was naive about men's intentions. "I don't think that would be a good idea. I have my reputation to consider, Mr. Tanner. I'm sure you understand." With trembling fingers, she quickly opened her door. "I was just being friendly," he mumbled, turning on his heel and looking dejected. "I loved Mrs. Tanner so much, you see. We were childhood sweethearts, happily married for 30 years until that cursed influenza took her." Beth hesitated. He sounded so forlorn, and she remembered the sharp loneliness of grief after losing her parents to the same disease. I suppose a cup of coffee wouldn't harm if we leave the door open a little bit." Mr. Tanner hurried back and gave her a beaming smile. "I knew you were a kind-hearted woman who would understand. You can trust me, Miss Wilson. I give you my word. It's the evenings which are the worst. The long, lonely evenings, sitting looking at Mrs. Tanner's empty chair." Beth hammered on the back door of Hall's haberdashery. Mrs. Hall, are you in there?" Her voice trembled with emotion, and she leaned her head against the wood, trying to stay calm. "Beth, what are you doing here at this late hour?" Ida Hall's face was etched with concern as she opened the door and ushered Beth into the hallway. "Has something happened at home?" I haven't been living at home for the last couple of weeks. Come upstairs and sit by the fire. You look as though you could use a cup of tea." Ida led the way up to her living quarters, which were above the business. "Why don't you take your shawl off and tell me all about it from the beginning?" Beth clutched the shawl tighter around her shoulders and sank into the chair that Ida pulled closer to the fire for her. "Owen found out that I was writing to a gentleman out west, Mr. Green. I replied to become a mail-order bride, like Vera's sister. Ah, yes, she told me that Tabitha is happily married now." Ida bustled around the small kitchen, boiling water and pouring it over the tea leaves. "Owen didn't approve of you doing the same then? He was so angry that he said I had to stop or leave home. But Mr. Green is a lawyer, Mrs. Hall. He sounds kind in the letters we've exchanged so far. I don't want to stop writing to him. So, where have you been living?" Ida placed the hot coffee on a low table next to Beth and then sat down in the armchair opposite her. "I found a room in a tenement building nearby." Beth's words caught in her throat, and she closed her eyes for a moment. "Mr. Tanner, the landlord, he said he was lonesome after his wife died, and that he wouldn't put the rent up if we could have coffee together. He said he missed his wife's company." "I see," Ida said softly. "And I guess he wanted more?" She reached over and patted Beth's knee, giving her a sympathetic smile. "The first 2 evenings, he behaved in a gentlemanly way, but this evening I could smell whiskey on his breath. And—" Beth couldn't bring herself to say the words. Instead, she loosened her shawl and revealed the rip in her dress. "It happened so fast," she whispered. "I didn't know how to stop him, and then after it was over, I just packed my bag and left. This was the only place I could think of to come to." Ida hurried to Beth's side and took her gently in her arms as she sobbed. "You're safe now, my dear. I have a spare bedroom, and you can live here as long as you need. I know it's not grand, but at least you won't have to feel afraid anymore." Beth gulped back her tears and gave the woman a watery smile, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Mrs. Hall. I promise I'll work hard and pay my way. I feel like such a fool. I honestly believed he only wanted someone to spend a little time with over coffee in the evenings. It's all my fault. We'll have no more talk like that. That wretched man took advantage of your good nature, and we won't let it happen again." She smiled and riddled the coals in the fire, making the room feel cozy. And after work, when we're upstairs, you can call me Ida, all right? Beth nodded. Thank you, Ida, and God bless you for your kindness. She sipped her tea, reflecting that she had encountered the worst and best in people in just a few short hours. Will you tell Owen what has happened, my dear? He is your brother, after all. No, Beth said, full of regret. He warned me that some men can't be trusted, and I thought I knew better. I must live with the consequences of my actions and stand on my own 2 feet. Ida lit another lamp and closed the drapes against the cold night air. Beth was a braver woman than many. She just didn't realize it yet, and she hoped that Mr. Green would be the kind-hearted husband she deserved. Chapter 5. New York, November 1880. Beth pulled Mr. Green's latest letter from her apron pocket and tilted it toward the lamplight. Now that it was late November, it was dark so early that Ida had closed the shop already. At least, that was what she had told Vera and Beth as she hobbled to the front door and shot the bolts across, although Beth could see that Ida was exhausted. She smiled as she smoothed the paper and started reading. Dear Beth, I can hardly believe we have been corresponding for almost 9 months now. I always look forward to receiving your letters, especially after I have been away for work. I hope you don't mind that my replies are sometimes erratic. It has taken longer than I thought to pick up more clients in and around Rocky River, which is why I still have to travel away. Some of my mining clients take the best part of a week to reach on horseback, but I want to reassure you that it won't always be like that. From your last letter, it sounds as though Miss Hall might not be able to continue with the haberdashery business for much longer, what with her failing health. It was lucky that she could offer you somewhere to stay after you had to leave your rented room, but I worry about what you will do if Miss Hall sells the business. I may have a solution that I think would help. But I don't have time to share it in this letter as I'm already running late on visiting a new client. You asked me whether I would like to have a family of my own one day. And my answer is yes, definitely. As I told you before, I grew up in a large family, and it is my dearest wish to have the same when I marry, God willing. All children are a great blessing and deserve to be cared for and raised in a happy home. I'm sure you feel the same way, Beth. As I can tell, you're a kind-hearted woman. I'll write again soon. Yours sincerely, John Green. Beth folded the letter and placed it back in her apron pocket with a happy sigh. She had wrestled with her conscience about whether to tell him about Mr. Tanner's terrible assault, but Vera had persuaded her not to. He will only feel disappointed in himself that he couldn't protect you, Vera had said, patting her on the arm to reassure her. A proper gentleman like Mr. Green would always want to defend the woman he loves, so it's best he doesn't know. The problem was that Vera's logic didn't take into account the fact that Mr. Tanner's unwelcome advances had gotten Beth in the family way. She stroked her belly absent-mindedly. Every time she had picked up a pen to write to Mr. Green, she had wanted to tell him, but she could never quite pluck up the courage. Her blossoming courtship with him was everything she had ever dreamt of, and with each letter, they seemed to be falling more in love. She could tell that he was kind and caring, and now she had confirmation that he wanted a family and saw children as a blessing. She was consumed by guilt at her deception, but her fear of losing John, her only chance at happiness and marriage, made her hang on tightly to the secret. Surely he will love the baby, even though it's not his. Perhaps it will be better for me to explain the situation face to face. She clung to the thought, wondering whether a proposal was imminent. Ida hobbled into the kitchen, and Beth hurried to the stove. Let me make you a cup of tea while you put your feet up. I'm sure this cold weather isn't helping with your joints. Thank you, dear. That would be lovely. Ida sat down at the table with a heavy sigh. She looked apologetic. You've probably noticed that my arthritis has been troubling me this winter. To be honest, it's the worst it's ever been. You do too much, Beth said fondly. Vera and I can serve the customers perfectly well if you want to rest for the day. I know you're both very capable, Ida replied. She straightened the salt and pepper pots, deep in thought, as though she had something on her mind. The thing is, she continued hesitantly, I've had an offer for the business. It's a family who has just moved to New York, and it's for more money than I would have expected. I've prayed about what's the right thing to do because I know how precarious your situation is, Beth, and I promised I would give you a place to live while you needed it. I've told them that they can have it on one condition, which is that they have to continue to employ you and Vera. Beth added a pinch of tea leaves to the pot and poured water over them. Her mind was whirling at Ida's news, and she wondered what the new owner would make of her being an unmarried mother. I suppose if I do the mending out the back, I might be able to work with the baby in a crib, she muttered to herself. Ida shook her head. I'm so sorry, my dear. I told them that you had lost your husband, just to avoid any unnecessary gossip. I don't want to leave you in the lurch right when the baby is due, so you're welcome to join me at my cousin's if you'd prefer. She's very understanding. It's not local, but I'm sure you would be able to pick up more work there as a seamstress. I hope you understand. I daren't turn the offer down in case I don't get another one, and my arthritis gets worse. You've been more than kind, Beth said firmly. I'm glad that you found new owners, and you provided a sanctuary to me when I needed it most. It's time for you to take it easy now and enjoy a quieter pace of life. She knew that Ida's cousin lived out in the countryside and how much Ida liked to visit her. Do you think Mr. Green might propose soon? Ida looked hopeful. You've been writing to each other for a while now. I think so, Ida. In fact, I already told him that I thought you might have to sell the business sometime soon. He says he's going to write me with a suggestion after his next trip. Her heart fluttered with excitement. The more she thought about his cryptic words, the more it sounded like he was about to propose. A few days later, just as the haberdashery store was closing for the day, Beth received another letter from Mr. Green. She was surprised he had written already, so soon after the last one. He wouldn't even have had time to receive her reply, and she wondered what was so urgent. Her heart raced as she opened it. My dearest Beth, having only just written to you, I spent last night thinking about your situation. It must be very unsettling, wondering if and when Miss Hall might sell the business, making you homeless. I don't want you to worry about it for a moment longer, which is why I've written again so soon. I believe that we are well suited and have shared enough of our hopes and thoughts in our letters to know that we are compatible. If you are in agreement, I would like you to become my wife. I know this isn't the most romantic proposal, but I shall remedy that when you arrive and we are together. I have prayed for a wife like you for so long, Beth. I just know we will be so happy together, raising lots of children and making a good life here in Rocky River. I enclose some money for your westward journey on the train and stagecoach, and I very much hope you will be able to come before the snow gets too bad. I may have to travel away to see clients, but let me know when you are due to arrive, and I will be sure to pick you up from the stagecoach stop. Yours sincerely, John. Is that what I think it is? Vera's eyes danced with merriment as she saw Beth smiling and clutching the letter to her chest. Has Mr. Green proposed? He has, Vera, and I'm so happy. Beth's eyes shimmered with tears. It means that I won't have to worry about where to live when Ida sells the business, but I shall miss you so much. Promise you'll write to me and tell me all your news? The two women hugged and cried with happiness, and even Ida dabbed away a few tears. She would miss Beth, but her prayers had been answered for Beth to find a nice gentleman who would care for her and the baby. Do you think I should tell him about my situation? Beth's happiness was short-lived as guilt swept over her again. Ma and Pa raised me to be honest, but I've been telling myself that it would be better for me to explain about the baby once I arrive. But now I'm not so sure. It doesn't feel right to start out our marriage with a deception between us. She wrung her hands with worry and paced back and forth in front of the counter. Ida rested her hand on Beth's arm and squeezed it. You're a good woman. And from what you've shared about Mr. Green, he sounds like a kind-hearted gentleman. And didn't you say he wants a large family? Beth nodded. Yes, I did ask him about that very directly, and he said that all children are a great blessing. Well, he'll see your baby as a blessing then, Vera announced, looking puzzled as to why Beth was still unsure. It wasn't your fault what Mr. Tanner did to you. Mr. Green will understand. I have to write back and let him know when I'm arriving in Rocky River. I think it's for the best that I tell him about the baby, Beth declared, instantly feeling happier now that she had come to a decision. At least that way, it won't be a shock for him to see me in the family way, and I'm sure he'll adore the baby as soon as it arrives. Which won't be long, Ida chuckled. Beth's figure was still surprisingly neat given that she was expecting, but the dates meant that she didn't have much longer to wait until the birth. Why don't you book your rail ticket first thing in the morning and then send him a letter explaining your situation? Don't you think I should wait to hear back from him before booking my ticket? What if he changes his mind? Beth was filled with doubts again. He's already said he can't wait to marry you, Vera cried, clapping her hands. If you don't travel now, you might have to wait months, what with having a newborn baby and the bad winter weather. He loves you, Beth. That's all that matters. Besides, he'll receive your letter before you arrive, so he'll know about the baby being imminent. I guess you're right. Beth allowed herself to be carried along by Vera's enthusiasm again, smiling as she imagined herself being swept into a tender embrace with her fiancé as she arrived in Rocky River, and the joy of welcoming her baby into the world not long after. Our baby, she told herself. It will be every bit John's baby as mine. As he says, all children are a true blessing from God. Chapter 6. Wyoming, December 1880. This is as far as we go, folks. Hudsonville, Wyoming, one of the finest towns of the West. The conductor gestured with an extravagant flourish at the snow-topped buildings they were approaching. I trust you all have accommodation lined up or someone is meeting you. This weather isn't suitable for wandering around in. A murmur of anticipation rippled through the carriage as the screech of metal brakes filled the air, and the steam train juddered slowly to a halt. Beth gathered her belongings and tied her cloak more tightly over her shoulders. It was a parting gift from Ida, and she was grateful for the thick wool fabric and fur-trimmed hood that would keep out the worst of the cold. According to the conductor, she still had many more hours in a stagecoach to complete her journey to Rocky River. You take care of yourself, Miss Wilson, he boomed jovially as she squeezed past him. He glanced at her swollen belly, grateful that the baby hadn't been born on the train, as often happened. Head up the street a little way, and you'll see the stagecoach waiting in front of the mercantile store for your onward journey. You'll like Rocky River. It's a quaint town. He tipped his hat and helped her down the steps onto the icy ground. Beth grasped her carpet bag firmly and walked out of the station as quickly as possible. The snow was already ankle-deep, and more was falling from the leaden skies. Unlike New York, where it quickly turned into filthy slush, the snow was still white and crunched under her feet. A sharp wind made her eyes water, and she lowered her head, hoping that the stagecoach would be ready for her to board. Are you all heading to Rocky River? A man in a heavy coat beckoned to a small group of people who had gathered in front of the mercantile store, and Beth quickened her pace to catch up with them. We need to get going before the weather gets worse. The coach driver took Beth's carpet bag and stowed it under the seat before handing her up, and she settled onto the uncomfortable seat with a weary sigh. She had been worried that the juddering train might make the baby arrive early, but now she could see it had been rather luxurious compared to the stagecoach. On we go. The driver slapped the reins, and the horses pranced forward in their leather traces. Hold on tight, everyone, he bellowed, leaning over in his seat at the front of the carriage to peer through the window at the travelers within. It's going to be a long and bumpy journey, but I reckon we should get there in good time by tonight or early tomorrow, as long as we don't encounter any trouble on the way. What does he mean by that? Beth turned to the other passengers. A portly gentleman who was trying to read his newspaper, 2 old ladies who looked like sisters, and another woman about the same age as her. Hold-ups, bandits, bears, perhaps. The portly gentleman rattled off the list of dangers that could befall them with a nonchalant wave of his pudgy hand. I've done this journey many times, ma'am. There's nothing to worry about. The fellow just likes to make it sound more exciting when he knows he has folks from the East traveling on the coach. His idea of a joke, I think. He raised his hat politely. I'm Mr. Swinton, by the way, traveling salesman for the lumber trade. It's not very amusing? Scaring us like that, one of the old ladies said sharply. She eyed Beth's waistline and sniffed disapprovingly. The sooner we get there, the better. My sister and I are already having regrets about leaving Boston. We were told this was a God-fearing place, but all we've seen so far is drunks and folks with dubious morals. She looked pointedly at Beth's swollen belly again. All the more reason for us to put our comforts aside and share the words of our mission, her sister said with a grimace as the stagecoach lurched over a rutted part of the track. Beth closed her eyes and tried not to take the old woman's words to heart. She expected that some people might think she had loose morals, but God knew the truth, and she was determined that nobody would speak badly about her baby, no matter what happened. The woman's judgment reminded her of Owen, which made her feel sad. Beth hadn't wanted to leave New York without speaking to her brother first, even though she knew he would be horrified that she was expecting a baby. But when she had gone to the family home to tell him that she was getting married, he was nowhere to be seen. He spends most of his time in the saloon these days, dear, one of the neighbors had called as she spotted Beth knocking at the door. Beth had been wearing her cloak, and she drew it around her to conceal her pregnancy. Such a shame that he's let himself be taken down that path. He used to be such a pleasant young man, but now he's no better than the old drunks who get rowdy every night, causing trouble. You're better off away from here. I saw you in the haberdashery store working hard. Your parents would have been proud of you. Beth had prayed every night since then that Owen might find God's grace again. She still clung to the hope that he would be happily married one day and could find it in his heart to be pleased for her new beginning out west. I'll write to him once I'm settled and married to John to tell him all my news. Beth smiled to herself as the rocking of the stagecoach finally lulled her to sleep. A hysterical scream snatched Beth from the deep sleep she had fallen into, and she sat bolt upright, wincing as her back twinged from the hard seat. Stop this wagon now, or else! In the stark whiteness outside, she could see two men on horseback next to the stagecoach. Their Stetson hats were pulled low, and they both had scarves tied over the lower halves of their faces, so all that showed was their eyes. We said, "Stop it now, driver. Don't do anything crazy like thinking you can outrun us." One of the men brandished a pistol, and the stagecoach rocked wildly as the horses skidded to a halt. "What do they want?" one of the old ladies whispered. Her eyes were wide with terror, and her sister shrank back into the corner of the carriage with a handkerchief pressed over her mouth, stifling a sob. "They're bandits," Mr. Swinton muttered. "Just do exactly as they say, and pray that they spare our lives." The young woman opposite Beth gasped and then crumpled into a heap as she fainted clean away. "Get out!" One of the bandits had dismounted from his horse, and he wrenched the door open, jerking his head to indicate they all needed to stand outside. "One of the ladies has fainted," Beth said hesitantly. She reached forward to help the woman, but the bandit smacked her hand away and glared at her. "Leave her. You could be reaching for a gun, for all I know." They scrambled out of the stagecoach and stood shivering as the wind whipped around them. "I'm not sure that you'll find anything of much value," Mr. Swinton said. He puffed his chest out, trying to show that he wasn't afraid. "How about you shut up and let us be the judge of that? Get the bags out." The taller of the bandits waved his gun at the stagecoach driver, who scurried to do as he was told. Beth surreptitiously pulled her cloak tighter to protect her unborn baby. She didn't care if they stole her belongings, but she couldn't risk coming to any harm. As the other bandit rifled through the bags and banded trunks, the tall one strolled between them all like a dealer assessing cattle. "I reckon we could use a pretty woman to cook for us," he chuckled and prodded the two elderly sisters. "You two are no good. You wouldn't last a single day out in the wild." The sisters clung to each other, not sure whether to be relieved or not. Then he stepped in front of Mr. Swinton, who gulped nervously. "I bet you've never cooked a meal in your life, huh?" the bandit said conversationally. "Although you might be useful in other ways." But, what about one of the two young ladies?" Mr. Swinton blustered, his jowls quivering with terror. "I've got a weak heart. Won't she do? He pointed toward Beth without a thought for her safety. That isn't very gentlemanly, is it? The bandit lifted his gun and let a shot off into the air. Don't hurt us, Mr. Swinton stuttered. He sank to his knees and pressed his hands together. Just take what you want. All of it. Take the woman. Just please spare me. I have a family that relies on me. I beg of you, don't kill us. Be quiet. What do you take us for? We're robbers, not murderers. The bandits looked at each other and suddenly roared with laughter. Well, we don't kill folks until we've had our fun, one of them added, slapping his thigh with amusement. Suddenly, another scream split the air as the woman in the stagecoach came to her senses, and pandemonium broke out. The horses reared in their harnesses, pawing at the air, and Mr. Swinton tried to run behind the stagecoach. Run! Run for your lives! He yelled. Beth spun around and slithered through the snow, her only thought to put as much distance between the callous bandits and her unborn baby. Come back! Shots rang out behind her, and Beth hurled herself over the edge of a narrow gully, hoping it might be enough to protect her. She tried to grab hold of something to break her fall, but her hands just clutched at the air as the rugged ground came up to meet her. Come back! Come back! The bandits' shouts grew fainter, and the snowflakes slowly settled on Beth's cloak as she drifted in and out of consciousness. Chapter 7. Wyoming, December 1880. Excuse me, ma'am? Are you okay? Beth slowly opened her eyes, wondering why she felt so cold. Had someone left the door of the stagecoach open? Ma'am, you need to let me help you up. She felt strong hands under her and gasped as a man's face suddenly loomed into view, lit up by lamplight. No, leave me alone. Beth tried to scramble backward, terrified for her safety. I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to scare you. The man took his hat off and moved the lamp so she could see him more clearly. I came across a load of tracks in the snow and clothes scattered all around. Were you on the stagecoach? Did it get held up by outlaws? Yes. Beth allowed him to help her stand up, and then she brushed the snow from her cloak with shaky hands. It felt as though she had been asleep for hours, but judging by the lingering daylight, she hadn't been there for very long. The last thing I remember is running away to hide in the gully, but I slipped, and I think I must have banged my head. The men were threatening to kill us all. She trembled as she remembered the terrifying event, and the stranger gave her a sympathetic look. I understand that you don't know me, but I can't leave you out here in the cold. He smiled, and the fine lines around his brown eyes crinkled in a way that Beth found rather endearing. My name is Mr. Murray, but you can call me Caleb. He shook his head. I was so worried about you. I'm forgetting my manners, he muttered, smiling again. I'm traveling to Rocky River if you want to ride with me. I'll be fine on the stagecoach. Thank you. Beth peered past him, but there was no sign of the stagecoach or any of its occupants. Oh, they've gone without me. I reckon the bandits must have gotten spooked. I've had a good look around, and they're long gone. Maybe the stagecoach driver thought you'd escaped to safety, although, goodness knows, where he thought you might find shelter or help out here. He sounded disappointed by the driver's reckless disregard for her. Beth followed Caleb toward his wagon, shocked that the stagecoach driver had left her to perish in the snow. Looking around the vast wilderness, she couldn't see any dwellings. So she had no choice but to trust Mr. Murray and pray that his intentions were honorable. It was a basic buckboard wagon with a sturdy horse in the harness that was patiently waiting for its master to return. Suddenly, she spied her carpet bag next to some spindly bushes. They didn't take my belongings after all. She hurried over to fetch it with a sense of relief. She didn't have anything valuable, but there were a few trinkets to remind her of home, and she was glad to still have them. Let me help you up. Caleb settled her onto the wooden seat up front and carefully tucked a rug over her legs. You've had a shock, and I expect it will take you a few days to get over it. I reckon if we ride through the night, I can get you to Rocky River by daybreak if that's all right. Miss Wilson? Beth Wilson. Beth gave him a smile as tiredness washed over her. Even though they had only just met, there was something comforting about his solid presence next to her, which made her feel safe again. I'm traveling west to marry a lawyer at Rocky River. He knows my situation, Caleb nodded. Well, It's nice to meet you, Miss Wilson. He's a lucky fellow, if you don't mind me saying. I hope you and the baby won't find this old cart too rough. I'll do my best not to hit any ruts. You're very kind. Thank you." She felt tears pricking the back of her eyes and pulled the rug a little higher. Caleb's voice was calm, and his demeanor so non-judgmental that it felt like a warm balm to her frazzled nerves. For the next hour or so, Caleb and Beth chatted lightly about the landscape as he described the 4 seasons in rural Wyoming and what he liked most about each one. Beth was surprised at how easy he was to talk to. He was curious about what it was like in New York, but not in an intrusive way, and Beth quickly felt herself feeling more relaxed and secure than she had since first stepping onto the train back east. "I think it's stopped snowing now. Look, the first stars are just coming out." Caleb pointed up to the inky sky as he clicked his tongue for the horse to trot on. "It's so beautiful." Beth looked up in awe at the vast firmament overhead. Now that the clouds had blown away, she could see more stars than seemed possible. She had never seen so many in her whole life, and the snow glittered as the moon edged higher in the sky above the silhouette of jagged mountaintops. "I feel as though the Lord is showing me something so glorious to remind me that his plan is one of wonder and majesty," she whispered. She blushed, hoping that Caleb wouldn't think she was being silly. She felt so moved by the landscape that she felt all her worries melting away. "That's a lovely way of putting it," Caleb said softly. "I've often thought the same. I just didn't know how to put it into words." He turned to Beth and smiled. "Why don't you get some sleep?" He shrugged his coat off and draped it over her shoulders. "That should keep you nice and warm. Rest up now. It will help you and the baby get over your ordeal." The next thing Beth knew, the sun was just cresting over the horizon, painting the morning sky with streaks of gold and orange. Despite the cold wind, she felt warm and comfortable, and she realized with a start that it was because she had been resting against Caleb's sturdy shoulder in her sleep. She hastily sat upright again, primly putting a bit of distance between them. She was grateful that he didn't say anything about it, merely clicked his tongue and murmured some words of encouragement to the horse to keep him plodding through the snow. The town that lay ahead looked charming, just like the conductor had told her. The shingle rooftops were pillowy with fresh snow, and smoke drifted up from the chimneys. It was smaller than Hudsonville, but Beth could see there were still plenty of businesses on the main street, and the houses were well spaced apart, as there was so much room for the town to spread out as it grew, unlike the cramped streets of New York that she was used to. "I can't believe I slept all the way," Beth said, feeling faintly embarrassed. She wondered if Caleb thought it was rude that she had barely spoken to him for so much of the journey. "My sister was the same just before her babies were born. Ma said it was because she wouldn't be getting much sleep after he arrived. Besides, you looked peaceful, so I didn't want to wake you. I hope the wagon wasn't too uncomfortable for you." Beth felt her cheeks turning pink. Sleeping for so long next to him felt like the sort of thing she would only do with someone she knew well. But somehow, Caleb did feel like an old friend already, even though they had only just met. "Where do you work?" Beth asked to cover her embarrassment. She wasn't even sure whether he lived in Rocky River. He had only said that he was traveling to the town, not that it was where he lived. "Here and there," Caleb replied. "I work at a mine and do a few other things." Beth wanted to press him for more details, but thought that it might sound too forward. She wondered if he might end up in her new circle of friends. "Where are you staying?" Caleb asked before she had the chance to say more. In all the upset of the robbery, Beth only just realized that she wouldn't be turning up on the stagecoach for John to meet her as planned. "Do you know Mr. John Green, the lawyer? I wrote to tell him which day I would be arriving, and he was supposed to meet me at the station where the stagecoach stops." She felt a ripple of panic that he might think she wasn't coming anymore. "Mr. Green?" Caleb darted a look toward Beth that made her wonder if she had said something to disappoint him. "Sure, I know of him. He lives in a big house at the edge of town. I can take you there." He pulled on the reins, and the horse turned smartly down a side street. "Looks like we're just in time." The sky had suddenly darkened, and snowflakes started drifting down again. A few minutes later, Caleb brought the wagon to a halt outside an imposing house. It was 2 stories high and had wide steps leading up to the front door, with an ornate column on either side. Beth felt flustered. She knew that John was well-to-do, but she had never imagined he lived in a house this grand. "Thank you. You've been very kind. I don't know what I would have done without you coming to my rescue." Beth patted her hair into place and adjusted her cloak so it discreetly covered her belly before clambering down with Caleb's help. He handed her the carpet bag, and she smiled up into his warm brown eyes, feeling a tug of sudden attraction that confused her. She was here to marry John, but part of her wanted to know more about this rugged man who had saved her, and now it was too late. "I'll be on my way then, Miss Wilson." Caleb jumped back up into the wagon. "Have a happy marriage, and I hope the Lord blesses you with a healthy baby." He clicked his tongue, and the wagon rolled away just as the front door of Mr. Green's house opened. "Goodbye, Caleb." Beth felt an inexplicable sense of loss as the wagon moved away and then disappeared from her view, swallowed up by the swirling snowflakes. "I never found out where you live," she whispered. "Are you looking for Mr. Green's residence?" A maid hurried down the steps from the grand house, frowning as she approached Beth. "I saw you loitering outside. He doesn't do work for strangers." Beth held her hand out to shake hands. "I'm not here as a client." The maid ignored her hand. "Well, what do you want then? I hope you're not begging. Mr. Green doesn't like beggars. This is a respectable neighborhood." "I sent Mr. Green a letter to tell him I would be arriving today, but the stagecoach was held up by bandits, which is why that kind gentleman brought me instead." Beth gave the maid a warm smile, hoping to thaw her sour expression. "Mr. Green and I are getting married." The maid's eyes widened in surprise, and then her mouth gaped open as Beth stepped onto the path, and she noticed the bump of her belly under her cloak. "Oh, Mr. Green is away on business. There must have been a mix-up because he didn't tell me you were coming. I'm sorry, ma'am. I haven't even gotten a room ready for you, but it won't take long. Come inside out of this terrible weather." She scurried ahead, and Beth sighed with relief. For one awful moment, she thought John had changed his mind about the marriage. She thought longingly of a hot bath and a soft bed, and followed the maid into her new home. Chapter 8, Wyoming, December 1880. I don't know what could have delayed him for this long. Maybe he's gotten snowed in. The maid bustled into the parlor with a basket full of chopped logs. She knelt in front of the fire and riddled it with the poker before adding a couple of extra logs. "Are you warm enough, ma'am?" Beth nodded. "Yes, thank you, Sarah. You're very kind." She felt slightly guilty at how busy the maid was, rushing from one job to the next. "Do you think the housekeeper will be back from visiting her sister soon? I feel bad that you're so busy. Maybe I could help you prepare lunch?" Sarah frowned. "Certainly not, ma'am. Mr. Green insists on his staff knowing their place. It wouldn't be right to have you doing work that I'm being paid to do." "I'm not used to having a maid," Beth confided. She had grown fond of Sarah since she had arrived a week ago. The girl was only 15, but had a sensible head on her shoulders and worked hard. From what Beth could gather, she had been left in charge of the house while the housekeeper was away for a few weeks taking care of her sister, who was unwell. "Mr. Green likes everything just so," Sarah replied cheerfully. "He's very particular about keeping up appearances, what with him being an influential man in these parts." She plumped the cushions on the armchairs and tweaked the heavy velvet drapes so they fell with perfect symmetry on either side of the tall windows that overlooked the garden. "The house is very beautiful," Beth commented. She perched on the edge of her armchair and took a genteel sip of tea, glancing around the room. The finely carved wooden furniture gleamed from where Sarah had polished it, and there wasn't a speck of dust in sight. Truth be told, Beth was finding it hard to relax, despite Sarah telling her she should. Mr. Green's house was clearly designed to show off his wealth, but it felt more like an ostentatious display of success than the sort of cozy surroundings she was used to. "Mr. Green likes to entertain clients. You should see how lovely it looks when he has dinner parties for the other important folks in town." Sarah put her hands on her hips, enjoying telling her new mistress about the place. We cook the food for days in preparation and use the best silverware. He even had a string quartet here once as part of the entertainment. I expect he'll want to host another dinner party in the spring once the weather gets better. You'll have to pick the menu, ma'am. He likes us to serve the finest food in the district. And maybe we could do a picnic in the summer, so the guests' children can come as well. From what I've seen of the garden, it would be lovely, Beth said, starting to feel excited about what her new life would be like. She imagined garden parties in golden sunshine and having a host of new friends. Children? Sarah sounded doubtful. I'm not so sure about that. He always says they should be seen and not heard, and I don't think he would like it if they were running about picking flowers and putting sticky fingers on the furniture. Beth felt a ripple of unease. John had said that children were a blessing, which would surely mean he wouldn't mind the muddle and mess that sometimes came with having a large family. I'm sure he'll be more tolerant of his own children, ma'am, Sarah continued as though reading her mind. I'm surprised he didn't mention that you were already in the family way. She turned pink. I expect he just forgot. He got called away unexpectedly, you see, to resolve a dispute over some land. I adore babies myself. It will be lovely to have a baby in the house. I think I'll eat lunch with you in the kitchen today. I like the company. Beth ignored Sarah's doubtful expression. Don't worry, I won't make a habit of it, she added hastily. There's no point lighting the fire in the dining room when it's just me in there. If you're sure? Sarah peered out of the window. It's just that if Mr. Green came home and found us eating together, I don't think he'd be very pleased. I'll tell him I insisted, Beth replied. She stood up and walked to the window next to Sarah. He didn't say when he would be home from his trip then? Is it usual for him to travel away at short notice? Sometimes, ma'am. Don't worry. You won't feel lonely once the baby's here. Beth smiled at the maid. She had an uncanny knack of reading her mind and reassuring her for someone so young. You're right, Sarah. I guess I'm just a little bit nervous about meeting Mr. Green in person. We've been corresponding for months, and I'd rather hoped he would be here to meet me. Well, I'm sure he won't be much longer. It is Christmas in a couple of days, after all. Just relax and make yourself at home. That's what Mr. Green would want. Beth sat at the escritoire in the corner of the parlor once Sarah had bustled off to do more chores. Seeing as she had some unexpected spare time, it was the perfect opportunity to write a letter to Ida and Vera to tell them she had arrived safely. After lunch, Beth found it hard to settle. As Sarah had said, it was only 2 days until Christmas, and she couldn't help but think of the festive holidays from her past when all her family had still been together. Even though they didn't have much money to spare, the house had been filled with merriment and happiness. This time next year, things will be better. The thought comforted Beth, and she strolled to the window to look out at the road again. The snow was still falling, making it hard to see far. But suddenly a gleaming carriage turned the corner from the direction of the center of town, pulled by a matching pair of gray horses. She held her breath. The carriage looked expensive, and sure enough, it stopped outside the house, and a tall gentleman jumped out. After handing the coachman some coins, the man strode up the path toward the house. He had a handsome face with aquiline features, and Beth could see that his coat was every bit as smart and fashionable as those she had seen in New York. She hastily patted her hair and checked her reflection in the mirror. Before Beth had a chance to go out into the hallway, she heard Sarah scurrying to open the door for her master. Goodness me, Mr. Green, we'd all but given up hope of you getting home in time for Christmas. Did you have a good trip, sir? Beth hesitated, suddenly feeling shy. It was all going well until my horse got lame. I should have gotten home 3 days ago, but there was a snowstorm, so it would have been too dangerous to travel. Have I received any letters since I left? No, Mr. Green. We haven't received any mail for a couple of weeks. Beth froze as she heard Sarah's words. That means John won't have gotten my letter. Her heart sped up with anxiety as she realized it meant that her careful plan to prepare him before her arrival so he would know about the baby had gone horribly wrong. Miss Wilson is in the parlor, sir. She's lovely, if you don't mind me saying. Miss Wilson is here already? I assumed she wouldn't arrive until the new year, seeing as I didn't hear back from her about my proposal. Beth took a deep breath and stepped out into the hallway. Good afternoon, Mr. Green. John, I'm Beth Wilson. I sent a letter to say I was coming as soon as I received your proposal, but it seems it didn't arrive. The hallway was shadowy in the cold winter light, but she could see that he was smiling as he came toward her. My dear, I'm so sorry. What sort of welcome was this, for you to travel all the way here and find me gone? I trust Sarah has been looking after you. I shouldn't have gone so far to see my client at this time of year, but sometimes it's unavoidable. Would you like a cup of tea and something to eat, sir? Why don't you warm up in the parlor, and I'll bring it through. Sarah bustled away after giving Beth a reassuring grin from behind John's back. I have been very well taken care of, Beth said happily. Mr. Green seemed every bit as charming in real life as in his letters, much to her relief. In the parlor, the fire crackled in the hearth, and the lamps glowed as darkness was already starting to fall outside. Beth walked ahead of him, and she pressed her hands together, praying that the next few minutes would go well. I'll have to let the pastor know that you're here so we can book him for our wedding. The words died on John's lips as Beth turned around to face him, and his gaze fell to her belly. Now that they were out of the gloomy hallway, there was no hiding her pregnancy, and his eyes flashed with sudden anger. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, gesturing at her swollen waistline. I'm sorry, John. I've wanted to tell you so many times, but I just couldn't find the words. Beth hung her head in shame. My landlord took advantage of me. She shuddered at the memory. In fact, he attacked me. And left you with child, I see, John snapped. His expression was stony, and he folded his arms. I ran away, and Ida Hall kindly offered me a room above the shop. I know I should have told you sooner, but I explained everything in my most recent letter, the one you were meant to receive before I arrived. Beth gathered her shawl tighter, feeling exposed under his harsh gaze. You said you wanted a large family, and that all children are a blessing. I didn't mean this sort of child. John's lip curled with scorn. Not a baby conceived out of wedlock by some ill-judged incident, if indeed you're even telling the truth. For all I know, you could be a woman of easy virtue. Beth gasped at the implication of his words. I'm not, John. You have to believe me. It was a cruel attack by Mr. Tanner. He forced himself on me. You can't possibly expect me to marry you now? John roared, suddenly letting the full force of his anger erupt. You have deceived me, Beth. It's unforgivable. I'm well respected in town, and I have standards to maintain. What would people think of me marrying someone who is already expecting? It's not as if you can even claim to be a grieving widow. But you said all children are a blessing, Beth repeated, clutching at straws. My own children is what I meant, John said curtly. Never mind pleading that you were taken advantage of. You turn up here under false pretenses and expect me to raise a child that isn't mine? If anyone is being taken advantage of, it's me. You're taking advantage of my good nature. Beth quailed under his harsh words, knowing that there was a grain of truth in what he was saying. She could have told him about her situation earlier, but she had been swept up in the idea of marriage, and he had sounded so kind in his letters. Can you find it in your heart to forgive me, John? She whispered. Tears pooled in her eyes, and she blinked them back, trying to maintain a shred of dignity. Please, would you at least let me stay here for a little while? I don't think it will be much longer until the baby is born. I could do some chores to earn my keep. We were robbed on the way here, and what little money I had was stolen. John gave her a hard stare and hesitated for a moment, considering her words. Hope flared in Beth's chest, and she gave him a tentative smile. Here we are. A nice cup of tea and hot buttered toast. I expect you'll be busy planning the wedding. Sarah's cheery words floated through the parlor door as she pushed it open, and John seemed to come to a decision. I have all the maids I need, thank you, Miss Wilson, and I am not a workhouse for the morally bankrupt. Please be on your way. He turned on his heel, almost knocking the tray out of Sarah's hands. I shall be in my study catching up on business matters, Sarah. Please ensure that Miss Wilson leaves immediately, and mind she doesn't steal anything on her way out. Wait, I have nowhere to go, John. Beth knew she sounded desperate, but she was beyond caring. She hurried after him and clung to his arm. "Please, John. I don't have any money, and it's almost dark. It's not safe for my unborn child to turn me out onto the street." "You should have thought of that before lying to me, Miss Wilson. You only have yourself to blame." John plucked her hand off his sleeve and brushed his suit jacket where her fingers had been with a contemptuous look. "Leave now. Otherwise, I shall be forced to fetch the sheriff, and you can spend the night in jail. He doesn't take kindly to dishonest people either, especially mail-order brides who try to dupe the poor, unsuspecting men of Rocky River." He strode away, leaving Beth standing in the middle of the hallway with tears rolling down her cheeks. Chapter 9. "Miss Wilson, wait! You can't go out in this weather. The snow is coming down hard now. I reckon we're in for a blizzard." Sarah's kind face was contorted with worry as she hurried down the back garden pathway after Beth. "I expect you overheard what Mr. Green said," Beth replied quietly. She pulled the hood of her cloak over her head and hitched the carpet bag up on her arm. She felt her cheeks turning pink from the shame of it all. "He's right. I should have told him sooner." "Maybe, but it's not right making you leave the house on a night like this. It's not your fault your landlord accosted you." Sarah glanced nervously over her shoulder. "I've never seen him so angry, but maybe you could take shelter in the servants' quarters for a few days. He never goes there, just until you think of something better to do. Will you travel back east, perhaps?" Beth was almost moved to tears by Sarah's kindness. She might only be a lowly maid, but she was more charitable than her employer by far. The idea was tempting, but now that she had seen John's true nature, she didn't want to linger. She shook her head. "It's kind of you to suggest it, but I don't want to risk you getting into any trouble. He would know you helped me, and you might lose your job." Sarah waved her concerns away. "How would he manage without a maid? He won't sack me, and if we're careful, he need never know." She glanced nervously toward the house again, flinching slightly as John's shadowy silhouette crossed past the window, and Beth knew she couldn't accept her offer. "I'll be fine," she said, sounding braver than she felt. "I'm sure I'll be able to find a room in a boarding house. I think I spotted several when I arrived." She squeezed Sarah's arm and gave her a smile. "Bless you for your thoughtfulness, Sarah, and I wish you a Merry Christmas. Will you take these at least? You need them more than I do." Sarah yanked the mittens off her hands and held them out to Beth. "Good luck, and I hope I see you in town sometime if you decide to stay." She lowered her voice and leaned closer. "Don't judge everyone by Mr. Green's behavior, Miss Wilson. He can be a bit snooty, but there are some kind-hearted folks in Rocky River, and plenty of nice gentlemen looking for wives. So I've been told." She grinned suddenly and blushed as though she had said too much, and Beth smiled back. It sounded like Sarah was sweet on someone, and she hoped they would treat her kindly. A few minutes later, Beth could no longer see the place she had called home for the last few days, as it vanished behind her in the swirling snowstorm. She had hoped John might have been more sympathetic and understanding to her plight, and she sighed heavily, trying not to think about how Owen would have called her a fool for putting her trust in somebody she had never even met. Vera's sunny assurances that John was a kind-hearted man had never been more wrong. As she turned the corner onto the main street of Rocky River, the wind tugged at her hood, and she blinked, trying to fathom which way to go. The tumbling snowflakes were making her feel dizzy, and she couldn't recognize the few landmarks she had noticed when Caleb had driven the wagon through town. What was more worrying was the fact that there was scarcely anybody around. Darkness had fallen just in the time it had taken her to stumble from John's house to the main street, and the town looked almost deserted. "What did I expect?" she muttered to herself. It's 2 days before Christmas. Most sensible folks will be indoors by the fire with their family. Mind yourself." An old man pushed past her with his head bowed against the driving snow. "Excuse me, sir. Can you tell me if there's a boarding house nearby?" The man paused and looked back over his shoulder. "I just came from the Rosebush Inn, and I saw Eli turning someone away because they're full up. It's this blizzard, you see. Folks who would have left town are staying longer so they don't get into trouble." He peered at her more closely. A woman alone like you shouldn't be out on a night like this. Try the other end of town, past the sheriff's office. The saloon might have some rooms if you're not too choosy about the company you keep." Beth raised her hand to thank him, but he had already hurried away. Normally, she wouldn't have considered the saloon, but she was desperate. Her back ached. The muscles in her arm were burning with the effort of carrying her carpet bag, and she felt a twinge of pain across her belly that filled her with alarm. "Not far now, little one," she whispered, rubbing her mitten-clad hand over her bump. She hummed some Christmas carols to herself as she plowed onward to keep her spirits up. With each passing minute, the snow was getting deeper, and the hem of her cloak dragged behind her, making it even harder to walk. "I'll just keep putting one foot in front of the other, and we'll soon get there." After what felt like an age, Beth looked up and saw yellow lamplight spilling out of the windows of the saloon. She practically wept with relief as she heard the tinkling notes of a piano being played and the sound of rowdy laughter. The Black Crow Saloon was written in peeling paint on a sign that swung above the door. Clearly, not everyone was at home with their families. She approached one of the saloon's windows cautiously, wanting to try and get a feel for the place before going inside. The snow was already piling up on the windowsill against the glass, and she scraped it away to peek inside, hoping that nobody would notice. She needn't have worried, as most of the men inside were standing at the bar with their backs to the door or sitting around the roaring fire in the hearth at one end. Several ladies in low-cut dresses were carrying trays of drinks and collecting empty glasses, weaving expertly between the grasping hands of the men who were drunk and intent on kissing them. Beth was suddenly unsure of what to do. When she had told Sarah she would find a boarding house, she had meant somewhere that catered to single ladies, not a saloon full of drunks. The way some of the men were leering at the barmaids filled her with trepidation, but another spasm of pain across her belly made her gasp and come to a decision. "I don't have any choice," she whispered to herself. Squaring her shoulders, she pushed the door open and slipped through it, hoping to catch the eye of one of the barmaids. "What do we have here?" The slurred words behind her made Beth jump, and she felt a man's hand snake around her waist. "Look, gentlemen, a pretty young woman's come in from the blizzard. New to Rocky River, are you, sweetheart?" "Leave her alone," another man yelled, looking up from his ale. "What would she want with an ugly fool like you when she could keep me warm at night instead? Let's get a better look at you, darling." He stood up and stumbled toward her, his eyes glassy and unfocused. Beth shrank back, desperately hoping to see one of the barmaids, but they were nowhere to be seen, and several men were crowding around her, swaying and grasping at her cloak, trying to remove it. "Leave me alone, please," she pleaded. She pulled her cloak open to reveal her pregnancy, and a couple of the men stumbled backward with a look of disappointment. "Hold up a minute. That's no way to treat a lady." A younger man who still looked relatively sober elbowed his way through the other men. "What are you doing here, ma'am? Are you lost?" Beth decided that honesty was the best policy, hoping to appeal to his better nature. "I traveled here from back east. I was meant to marry Mr. Green, the lawyer, but—" She glanced down and placed a protective hand over her belly. "Mr. Green, huh?" A thick-set man who reminded her of Mr. Tanner ambled toward her. "Well, isn't that interesting?" He thrust his face toward Beth and scowled. "That crook owes me money. I paid him in good faith to draw up some documents, and he never delivered them." "I'm sure the lady doesn't need to know about that," the younger man chuckled, rolling his eyes. "Take it up with Mr. Green, Jake, not her. Don't tell me what to do, Robbie." The aggrieved man shoved him aside and plucked at Beth's arm. His eyes glinted with lust, and a sly expression flitted over his face. "I'll happily take my payment in other ways," he murmured, winking at her. "He owes me money, and it looks like you need a bed for the night. How about you come home with me, and we can settle up that way, huh?" One of the barmaids hurried over, slapping Jake's hand from her arm. "What are you doing in here?" she hissed to Beth. "This is no sort of place for a woman in your condition. The men have been drinking, and Sally and I can't keep an eye on how they behave." She looked Beth up and down with an exasperated sigh. "You'd better be on your way. she muttered. I don't have anywhere to go. An old man I met suggested you might have room for me upstairs. Please, I'm desperate for somewhere to stay for a few days until the storm has passed. The barmaid shook her head firmly. I'm sorry, lady. The last thing we need is an unmarried mother having a baby during a snowstorm. Besides, a lot of these gentlemen will need a room later if they can't get home, and I can't guarantee your safety. Her expression softened slightly as Beth's face fell. She rummaged in her apron pocket and pulled a coin out, handing it to her. Keep going down the street a little way further. Take the second left turning, and you'll see a boarding house that caters for mail-order brides. It's much more suitable for you. Yeah, get on your way. We don't want your sort around here. Jake had grown belligerent after being thwarted, and he gave her a menacing look. If Mr. Green threw you out, it must be for a good reason. I reckon you're as crooked as he is. What sort of woman would behave in such a risky way? Another man yelled. The man called Robbie shot her an apologetic look before turning back to his drinking friends. Don't be mean to her. Perhaps it's not her fault. Jake clenched his fists and charged toward Robbie, knocking into Beth and sending her reeling. She slammed against a table and gasped in pain as her arm took the brunt of the collision. Suddenly, more men piled in and a fight erupted around her. The air filled with grunts and thuds as fists met flesh, and the barmaid bundled her toward the door. Leave now. You've gotten them all riled up. She pushed Beth out into the snow and pointed into the dark night. It's just down there, all right? Keep going, and I'll try to make sure none of them follow you. Beth nodded and lifted her chin up. Her ma had taught her to be resilient, and her unborn baby was relying on her. Thank you. I'm sorry I caused all this trouble. The barmaid grinned. Don't worry. They're always looking for an excuse to start fighting when they've been on the whiskey. If you ever need a job, come back after you've had the baby. A pretty young woman like you will keep them happy and buying more drinks. As Beth trudged away into the darkness, past the next row of houses, she wondered whether she would ever find shelter and safety. In the distance, she heard the clock in the town center chime 11 times. Earlier, she had been able to see into people's homes, watching the small domestic scenes through the windows, wistfully wishing she could be warm and cozy inside with them. But now, all of the windows were dark. Everyone had gone to bed, and it was only an hour until Christmas Eve. She had never felt so alone or so scared, but she knew that giving up was not an option. Her unborn baby was relying on her to find shelter and safety. She yawned, suddenly feeling overwhelmed with exhaustion. If I could just rest for a little while, I'll feel better. The snow was disorienting, and Beth turned around, wondering if she was going the right way or whether she had already tried down that street. The mounds of snow made everything look the same, and panic surged in her chest as she realized she was hopelessly lost. Terror gripped her, and the temptation to just lie down and sleep was almost overwhelming, except she knew that if she did, she would probably never wake up again. Dear Lord, please help me, she sobbed. Tears tracked down her cheeks, and her cloak felt like a lead weight dragging her down. She undid the buttons with trembling hands and threw it off, hoping that she might be able to walk faster without it. Please guide me to safety, Lord, and take mercy on my baby and me. Beth turned her face upward and let the snowflakes settle icily on her cheeks. An owl glided overhead on silent wings, catching her attention. She watched as it floated effortlessly through the storm, and as it receded into the distance, she saw a glimmer of light. She stumbled after the bird, filled with renewed determination. If there was a light, it meant there were people. This time, she was going to get help, and she wouldn't take no for an answer. Chapter 10. As Beth struggled through the snow, a strange sensation of warmth started to creep through her limbs, even though the icy snowflakes were sticking to her hair and settling on her gown. She felt laughter bubbling up inside her and staggered from side to side, zigzagging across the street. A small part of her mind wondered whether she was becoming delirious. Her pa had once told her that whilst walking to the bank one morning, he had come across a poor beggar who had died from the cold. As the doctor was pulling a blanket over the man's lifeless body, he had remarked that when someone felt inexplicably warm out in cold weather, It could be a sign that death was not far away. Beth could still remember her pa's warning that she should bear it in mind. "Come on, Beth, take my hand. It's not much further." She whispered to herself the same words that her pa used to say when her legs had gotten tired when she was a little girl. Thinking about her parents gave her renewed strength, and she gripped her bag tighter. "Come on, Beth. Come on." She looked up and was surprised to see that the pinprick of light she had spotted up ahead was now quite close. In fact, she could even make out the faint outline of what looked like a barn next to a log cabin. Without realizing it, she had walked to the edge of Rocky River and was almost leaving the town behind. This is my last chance. The thought pulsed through her mind, and Beth dragged her leaden feet toward the barn. The snow was almost up to her knees, and it took every ounce of her fading strength to get there. She crept around the back, using the rough-hewn walls to guide her until she found the entrance to the barn. Light seeped out from the edges of the heavy door, and she heaved it open. It looked like someone had only recently been there, as the snow had been cleared to allow the door to swing open, and she looked around cautiously, wondering who might be in there. Tiptoeing forward, Beth could see a lamp in the barn window and mounds of straw in the corner. There were several stalls along the far wall. One stall had 2 horses in it, and they leaned over the rail, eyeing her curiously. In the other one, a plump cow fidgeted and pulled some hay from the feed rack, chewing it rhythmically. In the farthest stall, there was a lone horse that pawed the floor and seemed restless, so Beth decided to stay well away from it. The comforting scent of hay and the gentle brown eyes of the animals filled Beth with relief that she had finally gotten out of the snow, and she dropped her carpet bag and shook her arms, trying to restore some feeling to her aching limbs. "I hope you don't mind me staying here with you." Beth stroked the velvety muzzle of one of the pair of calmer horses, and it nibbled her hand gently before turning away to get some oats from a bucket. Suddenly, another spasm of pain gripped her belly, and she doubled over, clutching her sides. Her legs started to tremble, and she hobbled over to the mound of straw. "It's just exhaustion. I can't have my baby in a barn. I just need to sleep, and then I can find the boarding house as soon as it's daylight." Beth sank wearily onto the straw and sighed as she felt another wave of pain building, making her belly contract. She closed her eyes, and her lips started moving as she murmured a prayer and turned to memories of her mother. Hazel had urged Beth to find happiness and love and to have a family of her own, and Beth owed it to her ma to fulfill the dreams she had. She would cherish this baby regardless of the challenges that had befallen her, and one day she would give her child the sort of joyful Christmas she had experienced as a child, full of love and kindness. Beth's mouth curved into a smile, and gradually she drifted off into a fitful doze. "Who is she?" A muffled whisper gradually seeped into Beth's slumbers, dragging her from the lovely dream she had been enjoying, where she had been decorating the Christmas tree with Owen while her parents watched with proud smiles. "Do you think she's hurt?" The whispering voices sounded gentle and concerned. Beth's eyes snapped open, and she tried to sit up, but before she could raise herself off the straw, the vice-like grip of pain around her abdomen stopped her, and she clutched her belly, collapsing backward again. "Oh, my dear, you're having a baby." A gray-haired woman rushed forward, followed by a younger woman who looked like her daughter. She fell to her knees and carefully took hold of Beth's hand, allowing her to squeeze it until the pain subsided again. Beth groggily gazed around at her surroundings, not quite able to place where she was for a moment, and found herself looking into the woman's kindly brown eyes, which were clouded with concern. She gave the woman a weak smile. "I'm sorry. I only wanted to rest for the night. I can pay you, and I'll be on my way as soon as it's daylight." Her teeth chattered as she remembered the swirling snow and how she had feared she might die in its icy embrace. "You'll do no such thing, my dear." The woman smiled. "I'm Margaret, and this is my daughter, Isabel. We've been waiting for our mare to foal, which is why we left a lamp lit in the barn. We weren't expecting to see another birth tonight, but I don't think your baby will be much longer." "You must be mistaken." Beth managed to push herself up into a sitting position and smoothed her hair down. She wondered if Margaret thought she was some sort of homeless vagrant. "I think I have a few more weeks to go yet." Margaret glanced up at Isabel, who shook her head slightly. "I've helped dozens of mothers welcome their babies in our community. I take it, this is your first? And what is your name, dear?" Her questions were respectful, and Beth nodded. "I'm Beth, and yes, this is my first baby. I traveled from New York a couple of weeks ago as a mail-order bride, but things didn't work out. I spent most of the evening walking around Rocky River looking for the boarding house, but with the snow, I couldn't find it. In that case, chances are the baby will be arriving sooner than you might think," Isabel said. "Do you think you can walk?" Beth gritted her teeth, but before she could attempt to stand up, another wave of pain engulfed her. "I'm going to ask my brother to come and help," Isabel said. "Don't worry, I've got 2 children, and he's used to women seeking Ma's help. You're in good hands now, Beth." She hurried away, and Beth closed her eyes again, feeling weak with relief. It felt like so long since anyone had shown any motherly affection for her that being cared for by these 2 kind-hearted women felt like a blessing she could hardly believe. A moment later, the barn door creaked open again, accompanied by a blast of icy air that made Beth shiver. "Take this poor woman across to the cabin, please, son." "Of course, Ma. If only I'd come out to check the mare earlier. This is no place for an expectant mother to be." Beth's eyes snapped open again at the sound of the familiar deep voice. "Caleb?" She gazed up into the warm brown eyes that crinkled at the edges as he smiled down at her. "You know him?" Isabel asked, sounding surprised. "This is the young lady I told you about," Caleb murmured. "The one the stagecoach driver left for dead after the robbery." He knelt down and took Beth's hand. "Thank goodness it was our barn you ended up finding. Ma's done this lots of times." Beth wondered whether she was still dreaming, but as she felt Caleb's strong arms lifting her up, as though she was as light as a feather, she realized it was true. Of all the places she could have taken shelter, it was none other than Caleb and his family's home she had stumbled across. "I don't know how I'll ever thank you," she whispered. Her eyes filled with tears as she was suddenly overcome with emotion. "That's enough conversation for now, Caleb," Margaret said briskly. "Take Beth to the spare bedroom, and Isabel, boil some water and fetch the towels. I don't think this baby will be much longer." The next hour passed by in a blur for Beth. After Caleb had gently laid her on the bed, he hurried back shortly afterward with kindling to light the fire in the bedroom to take the chill off it. Just like on the ride in the wagon, he kept up a steady flow of conversation while he made the fire and waited for it to get going properly, which helped calm Beth's nerves. And she remembered again how easy his company was. "How often are the contractions coming now?" Margaret asked, bustling in with a pitcher of hot water and a bowl. Isabel was right behind her with an armful of towels. "Looks to me as though they're only a few minutes apart now." Beth clenched her hands and groaned as the next round of pain built to a crescendo around her back and belly. She felt embarrassed, but when she gasped an apology, Margaret gave her a sympathetic smile. "It's completely normal and nothing we haven't heard before. It won't be much longer now, I promise." She rested her hands over Beth's abdomen and nodded with a satisfied look on her face. "It feels like the baby is the right way around, which is good." I'll step out and check that the mare is all right, Ma." Caleb's voice floated through the doorway, and Beth was vaguely aware of his retreating footsteps. "He's good with animals, but he won't want to hear you in pain," Isabel said, glancing up as they heard the outside door slam closed. "It's better this way. You won't have to worry about trying to be polite. Ma said even the neighbors could hear me hollering when I had Tim and Dorothy." Beth grimaced at the next contraction, but felt relieved that she was in such capable hands. She knew that to have gone through this alone would have been so much harder. "It's almost time now, Beth," Margaret said firmly. "You need to push when I tell you, okay?" She paused. "Push now," she cried. As the clock ticked on the mantel shelf, Beth felt as though she was drawing on every last ounce of her strength and resolve. Every time Margaret nodded, she bore down and pushed, wondering at times whether she might pass out. Just when she thought she couldn't do it for a moment longer, Isabel's face lit up with a smile, and the room filled with the lusty wail of her baby taking its first breath. It's a little girl, Margaret called happily. She deftly wrapped a swaddling cloth around her and passed her to Beth. Oh, thank the Lord. Hello, my darling girl. Beth looked into her baby's face and felt her heart swell with a love unlike anything she had ever imagined. Her eyes filled with tears, and she gently pressed a kiss onto her downy head. You're perfect. All her fears about whether she would love the baby less because she had been conceived in difficult circumstances melted away, and she knew there and then that she would adore her firstborn every day of her life. God had blessed her with a new life and brought her to this kind family for help, and for that she would always be truly grateful. Have you decided what to call her? Margaret bustled around the room, tidying up as the baby nestled against Beth's chest, taking her first feed. Beth looked thoughtful. I did have some names in mind, but they don't seem to fit now that I've seen her. Something to mark the fact that she was born on Christmas Eve, perhaps? Isabel suggested. Of course, that's a wonderful idea. Beth stroked her baby's soft cheek, marveling at the way her tiny hand was clenched around her shawl. Holly? I think I'll call her Holly. That's perfect, Isla and Margaret both said at the same time. Chapter 11. Caleb smashed the ice in the bucket and scrubbed his hands clean before drying them on an old towel. The mare had birthed a perfect foal. It was another mare, which was exactly what he wanted, so that he could breed from her and keep the bloodline going. He grinned as the foal levered itself up on spindly legs and shakily tottered toward its mother, nuzzling along her belly until it found what it wanted and started suckling some milk. The mare snickered and licked her foal clean. You're going to be a good mother, Indigo, I can tell. He leaned over the top rail of her stall and stood watching for a few minutes, enjoying the miracle of new life unfolding before him. The foal's fluffy tail flickered with ecstasy as it drank from the mare, making him chuckle. Maybe you're going to be the start of my dream business, little one. What do you reckon? Caleb grabbed a pitchfork and filled the feeding racks with fresh hay, thinking about how much he wanted to buy a plot of land and start breeding horses for the local cattle ranchers. He enjoyed his job at the mine, but working with animals was his passion. He knew that the land just beyond their home was coming up for sale soon, which was why he had been taking on extra work carting goods to the bigger town whenever he could. But he was still woefully short of what he needed. Mr. Green and his wealthy cronies had been buying up all the best land around the edges of Rocky River in the hope of driving the price up so they could sell it on at an inflated profit, and Caleb didn't stand a chance if this plot caught his eye. Thinking about John Green made him wonder what Beth had seen in him. She was such a gentle soul that it seemed like a strange match to marry the ruthless lawyer who was well known in these parts for putting money before kindness. A few minutes later, he let himself into the house to warm up and see how Beth was doing. He made himself a coffee, wondering why it was so quiet. He had heard the baby's first cries while he was out in the barn, which had been a huge relief, but now there was no noise. When Isabel had had Tim and Dorothy, they had cried plenty, and he felt a ripple of concern. How is Beth doing? He jumped up from the table as Margaret came out of the bedroom. And the baby? Is it a boy or a girl? Why don't you see for yourself? Isabel has gone to bed now, and I need to boil some more water. Margaret gave her son a fond smile. He loved children and doted on Tim and Dorothy. She only hoped that he would have a family of his own one day. Caleb tapped lightly on the door and pushed it open slowly, not wanting to intrude if Beth didn't want him there. How are you feeling? The concern on his rugged features was plain to see, and Beth smiled, glad to see him. I'm fine, she murmured, and so is little Holly. She peeled back the edge of her shawl as Caleb leaned closer to have a look. His expression softened and he grinned at her. A baby girl. She's delightful. You must be so pleased. Beth was surprised at how taken he seemed with Holly, but then remembered that Sarah had told her not to judge everyone by John's frosty reception. How is your mare? Did she have her foal yet? Caleb nodded happily. Uh-huh. She had a little mare, so we've been doubly blessed tonight, I reckon. We'll have to think of a name for her over the next few days. I always like to get to know them first, to see what fits. I'm sure you'll think of the right name. Beth felt a pang of regret that she wouldn't be here to know what he decided on. Your family has been so kind, Caleb. I really don't know how to thank your ma and Isabel enough, and you too, of course. That's twice you've rescued me. She gave him a wry smile. I'll go to the boarding house as soon as it's light. I don't suppose they will mind me turning up on Christmas Eve, will they? She glanced out of the window and could see that the sky was already losing its inky blackness, and the blizzard had stopped. Sunrise wouldn't be far away. If you think Ma will let you go out with a newborn baby into this weather, you'd better think again, he replied with a chuckle. I'm pretty sure Ma and Isabel will insist on you spending Christmas with us as long as you want to, he added. A shadow crossed his face. My pa passed away from cholera this time last year, and Isabel's husband also, not long afterward. Beth reached for Caleb's hand without thinking and squeezed it. I'm so sorry to hear that. It must be a difficult time for your family. I was too wrapped up in my own situation to realize, but I don't want to be a burden. If that's the case, I must definitely be on my way. She sat up higher in the bed, feeling guilty that she hadn't noticed that Caleb appeared to be the only man in the home. Be on your way? Margaret caught the tail end of the conversation as she returned with a cup of tea for Beth. We won't hear of it, will we, Caleb? But I don't want to intrude on your grief, Beth said hastily. Christmas is hard when you've lost loved ones. I lost my parents close together as well, so I know. Having you and Holly spend Christmas with us will be just the tonic we need, Margaret said, giving them both a warm smile. It will stop us dwelling on the past. Besides, we always have more food than we need. Stay with us for a few days, my dear, and then you can think about your future afterward. Thank you. That's very kind. Beth nodded her agreement, struck by how welcoming Caleb and his family were compared to John. She was a complete stranger and an unwed mother, yet they had shown her nothing but kindness. I think we should leave you to get some sleep now. If anything is worrying you about Holly, just call out for me. I know how strange everything can feel when you're a new mother, especially as you don't have your own ma to help. Margaret patted Beth on her shoulder and gathered up the pitcher and bowl. I didn't want to sound like I'm fussing about nothing, but do you think Holly's breathing sounds right? Beth peeled back the shawl again and felt a surge of panic as she heard a faint, crackly sound and noticed that her chest was rising and falling a little faster than before. Margaret hastily put the pitcher and bowl down again, then bent over Holly to listen. Ride and fetch Dr. Morgan, she said, shooing Caleb from the room. I think Holly's early arrival might have left her lungs a little weak. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about, but I want to make sure she's healthy. Caleb paced back and forth in the kitchen, wishing that there was more he could do. The last time Dr. Morgan had been to their house had been when his pa and Logan, Isabel's husband, had been ill with cholera, and his presence here again brought all the memories of their deaths back. Last Christmas had passed in a haze of sadness for their family, and he had hoped that this year would be different. He paused as he heard the rumble of Dr. Morgan's voice, but he couldn't make out what he was saying through the wooden door. Beth's carpet bag was still on the floor next to the hearth, from where he had brought it across from the barn. Seeing it there reminded him of how brave Beth was. She had traveled all this way in good faith to marry a man she had never met, and then he had thrown her out onto the street in the middle of a blizzard. It was no wonder the baby had arrived early, yet she had been more worried about not wanting to outstay her welcome than her own well-being. What sort of man would treat Beth so badly? He muttered, resuming his pacing. Beth had confided to Margaret and him earlier that Holly had been conceived as the result of an assault by her landlord, which had ignited a protective urge in Caleb's heart. But John Green had clearly seen things differently, assuming her to be a woman of loose morals and not caring about her fate, even though he had claimed to want a large family. The clock ticked, and Caleb suddenly knew he needed to turn to his faith in this hour of trouble. He couldn't just wait and hope. Grabbing his jacket, he strode over to the barn and saddled up his horse again. He jumped up and kicked his heels, navigating the snowdrifts as quickly and safely as he could. A few minutes later, the church came into view, and he was relieved to see that the doors were open. The pastor was nowhere to be seen, so Caleb tethered his horse and strode inside, kneeling in the pew at the front. He raised his eyes to look at the stained glass window and gradually felt peace entering his soul, like a soothing balm to his worries. Closing his eyes, he folded his hands together and prayed, "Lord, forgive me for my sins, and help me walk the path you have planned for me in your wisdom. I pray that your mercy will work miracles through the doctor and that Holly will be a healthy, happy baby. Thank you for bringing Beth into our lives, and grant me the wisdom to know how to help her, however she needs. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen." As he sat in the pew for a few more minutes, Caleb thought about his chance meeting with Beth as he had been taking the wagon back to Rocky River from running some errands. And then how she had ended up finding their barn during the blizzard. He pictured the way her chestnut hair curled around her heart-shaped face and how her blue eyes had sparkled when she had listened to him talking about his hopes to breed horses one day, nodding with encouragement. And then he remembered the purity of love he had seen etched on her beautiful face as she had looked down at her baby. He had always wondered what falling in love would be like, and now he wondered if this was it. He had been so busy looking after his family since his pa had died that he hadn't given a thought to romance, but he had known for a long time that he wanted a wife and a family of his own when the Lord saw fit to help him meet the right woman. Could it be Beth? And baby Holly? Was it fate that had brought them together after the robbery and led her to his barn? His pa had always told him that God moved in mysterious ways, and often something which seemed like fate was merely the Lord showing the path ahead if he would choose to see it. Caleb stood up again and hurried out of the church. He had to know if Holly was going to be all right, and he had a feeling that no matter what happened in the future, he would never be able to put Beth out of his mind, nor did he want to. Chapter 12. What did the doctor say? Caleb was almost too scared to ask as he stamped the snow off his boots. Margaret smiled. "Did you go to church? I saw the tracks in the snow." She knew her son well and was grateful that he was the sort of man who turned to the Lord in times of hardship rather than hard liquor, as some did. He said Holly had inhaled a bit of fluid during the birth. That's all. Her lungs will clear in a day or two. It's nothing we need to worry about. Thank goodness for that. Poor Beth, she's been through so much. Dr. Morgan was very reassuring, and yet again, I don't know how to thank you. Caleb grinned as he saw that Beth was sitting behind his ma in the armchair next to the fire. No thanks are necessary. We're just mighty relieved the doctor has said that Holly will be all right. We've certainly had a livelier time than usual for Christmas Eve, he added with a soft chuckle. The sight of Beth cradling her baby made his heart lift with joy, and he closed his eyes for a moment, giving thanks that his prayers had been answered. "I'm going out to check on the new foal," Margaret said. "Why don't you both have a cup of tea together and enjoy the peace and quiet before Tim and Dorothy get up?" Caleb poured out 2 cups of tea, suspecting that his ma wanted to give them a chance to get to know each other better. He found that he was eager to learn more about Beth, and he pulled up a chair, throwing some more logs on the fire to make sure Beth and Holly were warm enough. "Do you have any family to share your wonderful news with?" he asked hesitantly. Beth paused before replying, and a shadow of sorrow crossed her face. "I only have my brother Owen left now. As I said, I lost my parents to illness. Sadly, Owen became overprotective toward me, and when he discovered I had replied to John Green's advertisement to become a mail-order bride, he told me he wanted nothing more to do with me. That's how I ended up being accosted by Mr. Tanner, the landlord." Beth blushed, but knew that she had to be honest with Caleb. She had learned her lesson the hard way, that it was no good trying to play down the truth. She expected to see disappointment or even disgust in Caleb's eyes, but instead, he shook his head, looking sympathetic. "I'm sorry you've had such a hard time, Beth. I can see you never meant to trick Mr. Green either, and you had your reasons for needing to escape to a new life, hoping that he would understand." He gazed at Holly's contented expression as she slept in Beth's arms and wondered whether John Green would regret his hasty decision to throw Beth out if he saw her now. She was clearly going to be a wonderful, caring mother. And Beth had said that in his letters that he had spoken of wanting a large family. Maybe I'll write to Owen and tell him about Holly once I've gotten settled in at the boarding house. I don't like keeping secrets from him. They talked for a little longer, and not long after, Isabel emerged from her bedroom with 8-year-old Tim and 6-year-old Dorothy. Dorothy clapped her hands with excitement when Isabel explained that Beth had arrived during the night and that baby Holly was still only a day old. "It's a Christmas miracle, Ma. A beautiful baby born during a blizzard, and a lovely lady for Uncle Caleb to fall in love with." "Dorothy, I'm sure Beth has more than enough on her mind than thinking about romance," Caleb spluttered. He busied himself with adding more wood to the fire to diffuse the awkward moment, but was secretly pleased when Beth blushed, but didn't say it was out of the question. In fact, when he stood up, he caught Beth's eye, and they shared a smile before she looked back down at Holly, who was stirring in her arms. "I'd like to help you with any chores you need help with," Beth said once Holly had settled again. "Just tell me what to do, Islobel." Tim was already pulling on his boots, tagging along with Caleb, who said he needed to check the horses and shovel snow from the lane in case wagons needed to get through. "I think you should spend the day resting. There will be plenty of time to help out, but you've been through a difficult birth and a lot of worry with Holly's condition." Isabel bustled around the kitchen making porridge and coffee for breakfast, while Dorothy cooed over Holly. Beth could tell they were a close-knit family and agreed to Isabel's suggestion, suddenly feeling overwhelmed by the events of the last 24 hours. She could hardly believe she had still been at John's elegant house only the day before. It was already starting to recede in her mind, like a bad dream she had woken from, banished by the sunlight. "Merry Christmas to you all." The crisp winter air rang out with joyful greetings as Caleb offered Beth his arm and helped her back up into the wagon. It was the following day, and she had joined Caleb, Isabel, Tim, and Dorothy in attending church. Holly had slept all the way through their outing, snugly wrapped against Beth's chest under a cloak that Isabel had lent her. The service moved her to tears because it reminded her of when she had been younger, when her parents were still alive, and she and Owen were still close. Now the folks of Rocky River were hurrying home, eager to enjoy themselves, and Beth blushed as several people looked at her with curious stares. "I hope you've gotten your appetite back." Caleb lifted his hand to wave goodbye to the pastor, and the wagon creaked forward in the snow. "Ma always cooks extra because we like to welcome any neighbors who might call in." Margaret had stayed behind, saying she wanted to make sure the food didn't spoil, but Beth wondered whether it was also so she could have a quiet moment to remember her late husband. "I certainly have," Beth replied. "Who knew that being a mother would make me so hungry?" Holly waved a tiny fist from within the cozy cloak, and Caleb felt his heart squeeze with happiness at how good it felt to have them by his side in the front of the buckboard wagon. An hour later, Beth emerged from her bedroom wearing her best velvet gown. She would have to take it in again once she got her figure back, but she wanted to make an effort to look nice because she could tell that Margaret wanted the day to be special. She gasped as she went into the kitchen. In the time she had been resting and feeding Holly after church, Caleb had decorated the room with boughs of evergreen foliage from the fir trees outside, and there were candles twinkling on the table, which groaned with platters of food. "Do you like it, Beth?" Dorothy took her spare hand and pulled her toward the table. "We've set a place for you next to Uncle Caleb, and we even put my old crib in the corner of the room so baby Holly can be with us." Beth blinked back tears. "It's the most beautiful Christmas I can remember for a long time. Then let's say grace and tuck into this lovely food that Ma's made, shall we?" Caleb smiled around at everyone, noticing how lovely Beth looked in her velvet gown. A sudden knock at the door announced that their neighbors had arrived, and before long, the kitchen was full of loud chatter and the beguiling aromas of good food mingling with the scent of pine and festive spices. Beth needn't have worried about whether she would fit in. Everyone went out of their way to include her, and by the end of the meal, she felt as though she had been part of this small community forever. She couldn't remember when she had last felt so content. Every time her thoughts turned to what the future might hold for her and Holly, and she felt a moment of worry about whether she would be able to provide for her new baby, it seemed as though Caleb sensed it, and he would shoot her a reassuring smile or lightly touch her hand. "Have you had a nice day? I hope it wasn't too much for you." Caleb's face was full of concern later that night when Beth stepped outside for some fresh air. The neighbors had walked home, and Tim and Dorothy had gone to bed, leaving Margaret and Isabel reading quietly by the fire. Beth looked up at the starlit sky and nodded. "It was magical. Thank you so much for making me feel so welcome." She pointed up as a shooting star suddenly arced across the inky darkness above them. "Look, a shooting star, just like the one you showed me when you saved me from the bandits." Caleb brushed a smattering of snowflakes off the two rocking chairs, and they sat side by side in companionable silence for a while. "I've been thinking, it's a shame for you to spend money on the boarding house if you don't need to. Ma and Isabel said they're happy for you to stay with us for as long as you like." He shot her a look that was hard to read. "I'd like that too," he added. "I'll be back working at the mine again in a few days. I would miss seeing you and Holly in the evenings if you left. Only if you agree that I can contribute to the house with more than doing chores," Beth said firmly. "I've been racking my brain about how to provide for Holly and pay for a room in the boarding house, but one of your neighbors mentioned that the dressmaker in town is looking for someone to help her. I used to take in mending and make gowns at Ida's haberdashery store in New York. If the dressmaker in Rocky River is happy for me to bring work home, it would fit around Holly perfectly. I don't expect you to pay rent to stay with us." "I insist," Beth continued, giving Caleb a wry smile. "You'll find out I can be rather headstrong once I set my mind to something. It's the least I can do. You saved my life, and then your family gave me shelter when I needed it most. Please let me say thank you, the only way I can. I'll stay for a few weeks, but if I feel it's too much for your ma having us here, I'll make other arrangements." As much as she wanted to be part of the Murray household, Beth felt wary about overstaying her welcome. Caleb took Beth's hand and looked into her eyes, which made her heart beat faster in response. She felt the same tug of attraction she had experienced before, and couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to melt into his strong arms. "If that's what it takes to make sure you stay with us, then I can see I'll have to agree. But promise me you won't overdo it. I'd hate for you or Holly to get sick because you're exhausted." "I'm stronger than I look," Beth said softly. "Thank you again for the most wonderful day, Caleb. It means more than you will ever know." Chapter 13. Wyoming, March 1881. A brisk wind flapped the bedsheets as Beth pegged them on the washing line, and she turned her face to the sun, enjoying its warmth on her cheeks. Spring had arrived early in Rocky River, Margaret had told her that morning. It wasn't unusual for the snow to remain until the end of March, but several weeks ago a warm westerly breeze had blown through, thawing the frozen landscape. A few spring bulbs in the orchard were already in bud, and the birds were chirping loudly in the trees. The rumbling sound of a wagon approaching brought a smile to Beth's face. It was Caleb returning from town with the wood he was using to build a corral beyond the barn. She was happy that he was taking a few small steps toward his dream of breeding horses. "Shall I help you unload that wood?" "Holly is asleep, and I've already finished sewing the alterations for Mrs. Beaton's gown." Caleb reined the wagon to a halt and jumped down, landing in front of her. "If you don't mind, that would be good. Let me just change into my old calico gown and fetch some gloves." Beth hurried away, and Caleb felt the familiar surge of protectiveness and happiness as he watched her. There was something about the way her chestnut curls lifted in the breeze and the sweetness of her smile that had captured his heart right from the first time he had settled her into his wagon on that snowy evening after the robbery. He had fallen in love with her, but he wasn't yet sure if she felt the same way about him. "Why don't you and Caleb have a picnic lunch outside today? I can watch Holly, and it will save you from having to come back over." Isabel packed a couple of meat pies into a basket and handed them to Beth. "We used to do this when we were children. There's a sheltered spot on the far side of the barn that catches the spring sunshine. I always thought it would be the perfect place to build a log cabin if we owned the land beyond our boundary. It sounds lovely. Maybe Caleb could make a bench to go there for the summer." Beth checked Holly in her crib. Her heart still overflowed with joy every time she looked at her baby girl, and it was all the more precious because of her brush with ill health after the birth. Thankfully, Holly had made a swift recovery and seemed to be thriving. Beth adored being a mother, and all her fears about whether she would be able to give her daughter a happy upbringing had melted away, especially as Margaret kept insisting that she should continue to stay with them for as long as she wanted. It had gotten to the point where the Murrays felt like family to Beth, and she was truly grateful for how they had taken to Holly. Not a day went by without Dorothy wanting to help look after her, and Tim pulling funny faces to amuse her. "She's doing so well," Isabel said, joining Beth next to the crib. "You're a wonderful mother, Beth. Maybe you'll have more children in the future?" She sounded slightly wistful, and Beth felt a sense of kinship with her. "And you too, Isabel. I know you loved your husband very much, but you never know when a kind-hearted gentleman might be looking for a wife." Isabel looked flustered, and her cheeks turned pink. "Ma's been saying the same, but I'm not sure about marrying again. What if it doesn't work out well? I do miss having a husband to be close to." Beth gave her a sympathetic smile. "My pa was a great believer in fate. When the time is right, you'll know." "Well, I'm too busy at the moment," Isabel shot back, but she seemed happy to hear Beth's words. "Don't worry about Holly. She's such a poppet. I love looking after her. Caleb will be pleased if he can make a good start on the corral, so take as long as you like." Beth thought about what she had just said to Isabel as she walked toward the wagon where Caleb had made a start unloading the wood. Caleb had gotten into the habit of asking her to sit outside on the veranda after dinner every evening so they could look at the stars. To start with, she had wondered if he was just being kind to help her settle in, but recently he had told her it was his favorite part of the day. They never ran out of things to say, and gradually Beth had shared more about her past with him, and Caleb had confided in her about his dreams for the future, to save up enough money to buy the land next to them, and slowly build a horse breeding business. His eyes lit up when he talked about his vision of having a small ranch and leaving the dangerous mining job behind, and Beth encouraged him, making suggestions that made him look at her with newfound respect. "You have a good head for business, Beth," he had told her a few nights ago, looking at her with admiration. "It's thanks to my pa and Ida Hall. They both encouraged me to think about what folks like to buy and how finances work. I hope you don't think I'm too forward for suggesting ideas to you." "Certainly not. We make a good team." Caleb had held her gaze, and Beth felt the heat flood her cheeks. As she got closer to the wagon, Beth paused for a moment in the shadow of the barn to examine her feelings. She watched the muscles rippling under Caleb's shirt and the way he stopped every now and again to talk to the horses that he had just turned out. There was no denying that she found him attractive. But it was more than that. His gentle demeanor with the animals, the way he doted on Holly and Dorothy and Tim, and how hard he worked to support his ma and sister. Caleb was the sort of man she yearned to marry, but she feared that her past might make him only ever see her as a friend. She sighed, but then brightened. If she and Caleb were destined to just be friends, it was still a blessing, because he was the truest friend a person could ever wish for. "Ready to start?" Caleb caught sight of her and lifted his hand to wave. "Yes, Holly has had a feed, and Isabel has given me a picnic lunch so we can work through. Let's see how much we can get done." Beth hurried toward him, happy that they would be able to spend the next few hours together. The sun was just starting to sink in the sky as Caleb secured the final rail of the corral, and they stood back to admire their handiwork. "You were right when you said we make a good team," Beth said, sighing happily. "Now you'll have somewhere to school your horses, and you're one step closer to your dream." She had been back to feed Holly several times during the afternoon. but Isabel had urged her to work outside for as long as she wanted to. Caleb tidied their tools away, and they stood side by side, leaning on the top rail. Indigo and her foal were grazing in the small paddock next to the barn, and the sky was streaked with gold and pale pink as the sun started to set. "It's all thanks to you, Beth. Some folks say that I'll never be able to do it, not on a miner's wage, but you never doubt me, and that means a lot." "Don't listen to what they say," Beth said stoutly. "You work hard and you're determined. The Lord will show you how. That's what I believe." "There's something I've been wanting to ask you for a little while, Beth." Caleb took his hat off and ran a hand through his hair, then brushed the sawdust from his shirt. Beth nodded, the breath catching in her throat. There was an intensity in his eyes that she hadn't seen before that made her pulse quicken. "Go ahead," she said softly. "The thing is, I don't have much to offer. You know that I don't earn much at the mine, and my dream of having a ranch might not come to anything. The more I've gotten to know you, Beth, the more I've come to hope that you would stay here in our home. Margaret has been very kind in letting me stay, and I've enjoyed getting to know you, too, Caleb." Beth felt suddenly shy as she met his warm brown gaze, and the air between them crackled with emotion. "I honestly don't know how I would have managed with Holly without your support. You saved my life and then made me feel so welcome." "What I'm trying to say," Caleb twisted his hat nervously and then set it to one side, taking Beth's hands in his own. "What I'm trying to say is, will you marry me, Beth? I'd like nothing more than to be your husband and Holly's pa." Beth felt a wave of emotion breaking over her. Ever since she had traveled west, thinking that she would marry John, only to be thrown out onto the street, she had feared that she might never find true love. But now, this kind-hearted man was asking to marry her. She took a deep breath and started to nod. "Beth, there you are." A sudden shout intruded on the intimate moment, and before she had time to reply to Caleb, they saw a man galloping toward them. The horse got closer and skidded to a halt, sending up a shower of pebbles. "John, what are you doing here?" Beth couldn't keep the shock from her voice as her previous fiancé dismounted from his horse and strode toward her. John Green raised his hat and gave Caleb a curt nod by way of a greeting before turning to give Beth his full attention. "I've received a letter for you, my dear, from a lawyer in New York." "A letter from a lawyer?" Beth's first thought was that something terrible had happened to Owen. "Where is it, then?" John gave her an ingratiating smile. "I hope you don't mind, but I opened it before I realized it was for you. And when I saw that it was from a lawyer, I read it because it's probably not the sort of thing you would understand." Beth bristled at the idea that he had been reading her mail, but bit back the sharp retort that was on the tip of her tongue. "I expect I'll be able to get the meaning of it if you could give it to me, please." "I wasn't implying that you wouldn't, my dear." John pulled the letter from his coat pocket, but still didn't hand it over. "I have missed you so much, Beth. I think back to those letters we exchanged, and I think I made a terrible mistake asking you to leave. I was distracted by my work, and I wasn't thinking straight." Caleb picked up his bag of tools and strolled away. He didn't want Beth to feel as though he was interfering in a private conversation, even though he didn't trust Mr. Green for one moment. "I'll just be over here if you need me," he called. Beth nodded and folded her arms, her expression hard to read. "I'm sure this won't take long," she replied. Caleb's heart sank as he saw John place a hand on Beth's shoulder. He was a man of influence in these parts, wealthy and successful, with a grand house and a thriving business. If he wanted to try and win Beth back, Caleb knew that John would be able to offer Beth a far more comfortable life than he ever could. "There's great news in this letter," John said, giving Beth a warm smile. "It's from a lawyer acting for Ida Hall, your previous employer. She decided that since she was getting on in years and was perfectly comfortable living with her cousin, she would give you 1/3 of the proceeds of selling her business. Plus, the other third is going to someone called Vera. Your old friend, I believe?" His gaze lingered on Beth's womanly figure with an appreciative smile. "It's a considerable sum of money. You're rather a wealthy young woman now, Beth." Beth's eyes widened with shock as she read the contents of the letter, which confirmed everything that John had just said. "Oh, Ida, that's so kind," she murmured to herself. "I need to tell Caleb my good news," she added. Before she could walk over to Caleb, John's hand shot out, and he held her back. "Beth, I'm sorry about what I did. It was just the shock of seeing that you were with child. Could you find it in your heart to forgive me? The thing is, I've been thinking, we should put all that nonsense behind us and start over. I've already spoken to the pastor, and he says he can do a wedding for us next week." "Marry you?" Beth's words came out louder than intended, and Caleb looked up sharply. His worst fear was coming true. He had left it too late to declare his feelings for Beth, and now John was going to steal her away again. He could have kicked himself. "I know I should have given you more notice, but I didn't want you to slip through my fingers a second time, Beth." John's voice sounded sincere, and he took Beth's hands in his own as though they were courting again. "We can have a grand party to celebrate once the weather improves, and we won't need to worry about the baby stopping us from enjoying ourselves. I already have a nanny picked out to look after it for you. You'll be able to join me on business trips, and of course, I'll take care of investing the money Ida has given you. You don't need to bother yourself with that." "You seem to have thought of everything." Beth looked up at him, noticing the glint of triumph in his eyes as he started to nod. "I have, my dear." He glanced around at the wooden cabin and the mud outside the barn, his lip curling with disdain. "You don't belong here, Beth. Come back home with me now and live the life of luxury and comfort you deserve." Beth pulled herself up to her full height and removed her hands from his embrace. "That's where you're wrong," she said calmly. "When you threw me out, I could have died in that blizzard. Or worse, I could have lost the baby. But I've apologized, Beth. There's no need to dwell on the past when we have a wonderful future ahead of us." John's aquiline features were marred as he frowned with irritation, and his voice sounded sulky as he realized she was answering back to him. "This is exactly where I belong, John. Right here with Caleb and his family, who welcomed me with open arms and gave me a safe place to bring my little girl into the world. Holly is her name, and I wouldn't dream of leaving her care to a nanny so I could go gallivanting off on business trips." "I think you're making a big mistake," John blustered. "These sorts of folks will just take advantage of you, especially now that you have money. I wouldn't trust them if I were you." Any signs of contrition for his previous behavior had vanished, and his eyes flashed with irritation. Beth shook her head with amusement at his reply. "I trust them far more than I trust you, John. Let's face it, you came rushing over here asking for my hand in marriage simply because you found out Ida had left me a significant amount of money, whereas Caleb asked me to marry him when I had nothing to my name." "You're impossible," John snapped. "I'm offering you a life of wealth and comfort, and you're willing to throw it all back in my face to live in this pigsty. You ungrateful wretch." His voice rose with frustration. "I suggest you get back on your horse and ride away now." Caleb growled, striding to Beth's side. "You might think you're superior to folks like us, but I won't have you speaking to Beth in that way. She's a kinder, more thoughtful person than you'll ever be." John eyed Caleb warily before giving an exaggerated sigh. "You're welcome to her and that brat of a child. I was mistaken, Miss Wilson. You're not the sort of woman who would fit well in my world. And as for you, Mr. Murray, if you're foolish enough to take on another man's leftovers, then good luck to you. You're both as bad as each other." Beth put her hand on Caleb's arm as she saw his hands bunch into fists. "Let him go, Caleb. His insults mean nothing to me. I know that Holly is not what he says." Her chin shot up as she looked John in the eye. "I won't stoop to your level and belittle you, John. I made a mistake by not telling you I was expecting a baby, but you could have behaved more kindly if you'd wanted to. I hope you find a wife you can love and enjoy the blessings of a happy family. Everything has worked out for the best, I believe, and I'm sure you'll agree with me one day." John's shoulders slumped as her measured response took the heat out of his anger. "I suppose so," he muttered. He jumped back onto his horse and urged it into a gallop. As he disappeared into the distance, Beth turned to face Caleb. "Before we were so rudely interrupted, I was about to say something." "Yes?" Caleb felt his heart lift again as he gazed into her eyes, which were sparkling with merriment. "It would make me the happiest woman in the world to become your wife, Caleb." She melted into his embrace as their lips met and lingered in a soft kiss that felt as though they belonged together forever. "I think I started falling in love with you from the moment you tucked that rug over my knees in your wagon on that snowy night when you rescued me." Caleb chuckled. "I couldn't get you out of my mind either. It was the hardest thing ever to leave you outside Mr. Green's house, and when I saw you in our barn, I thought all my prayers had been answered." Beth leaned against Caleb's strong chest, enjoying the sensation of being encircled in his arms. "Having Holly was the best day of my life," she whispered. She looked up into Caleb's brown eyes and felt her heart swell with love. "But knowing that you will be her pa and my husband makes it even better. I love you, Caleb. Shall we go and tell the family?" They linked arms and strolled back toward the cabin. He grinned as they saw Dorothy's face at the window and heard her squeal of excitement. "I reckon they might already know that we're getting married," he said, looking down at Beth with nothing but love in his eyes. Epilogue, Wyoming, December 24th, 1881. "Look, Dorothy, Holly wants you to help her walk." Beth smiled as Holly crawled speedily across the rag rug and then held her chubby hands up for Dorothy to steady her. A moment later, she took 3 steps by herself and then plopped back down, clapping her hands and treating everyone to a giggle of delight. The kitchen smelt of festive spices as the women prepared for Christmas the following day. But there was also a large apple pie in the middle of the table, as it was Holly's favorite. "Can you believe she's 1 year old already?" Isabel looked up from where she was peeling potatoes with an indulgent smile as Dorothy settled down to read Holly a story by the fire. Beth shook her head. "So much has happened. I almost need to pinch myself to believe that it's true." As she kneaded the dough to make fresh bread rolls, her thoughts drifted over the past 12 months. She and Caleb had gotten married a month after his proposal, and it had been a wonderful day. The pastor's words had brought tears to her eyes as they made their vows in the Lord's name, and Caleb had given her an intricate silver ring he had secretly been making for weeks before. Then they had all returned to the homestead, where their neighbors and friends had come to enjoy the fruit punch and spread of food that Margaret and Isabel had baked. The fact that the day had been done on a modest budget didn't diminish it in any way. All that mattered to Beth was that she was marrying the man she had fallen in love with, and it was a day filled with kindness and good wishes for their future. Her one sadness had been that Owen still hadn't replied to the letters she had sent, telling him about Holly and that she was staying in Rocky River. "Your brother will come around. Just give it time," Margaret said, breaking into her thoughts. She knew that it was something that Beth regretted. Beth looked at her kindly mother-in-law and shook her head. "I've written 3 more times to Owen, but there's still no reply. Maybe he's living somewhere different now? Could you write to ask one of your old neighbors instead?" "I suppose that might work." Beth felt a renewed sense of determination. So much had gone right for her this year, but a reconciliation with her brother was something she couldn't put out of her mind. "I'll try again after Christmas." A loud thudding on the veranda told her that Caleb had returned, and she hurried to the door to open it for him. "Is this big enough?" His voice was muffled by the fronds of the large pine tree he was standing behind, and all she could see was his hands on either side of it and his hat peeking over the top. "Dada! Dada!" Holly crawled toward the door, and Beth scooped her up just in time. "Where's my gorgeous girl?" Caleb propped the tree up in the corner of the room, and then swept Beth and Holly into an embrace. His cheeks were red from the cold, and snowflakes dusted his shoulders. After he had given them both a kiss, he pulled a document from his pocket and waved it in the air. "Is that what I think it is?" Beth's eyes sparkled with excitement. "We own the land now?" "We sure do, Mrs. Murray. We are now the proud owners of 200 acres of prime grazing land, thanks to the generosity of Ida and your kindness in agreeing that I could go to the auction. This is the title deeds, and I made sure your name was on there as well. And it's right next door, too." Isabel hurried over to hug her brother and then Beth. It's perfect. You'll be able to build your own cabin on the other side of the barn and still be close enough for us to be together." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Beth said. "You are my family now, and I finally got the chance to thank you for saving my life and to repay your generosity for taking care of Holly and me." Her eyes filled with sudden tears as she looked around the room at the people who had become so dear to her. "Here's to the start of your new horse breeding business," Margaret chimed in with a happy sigh. "Your pa would have been so proud of you, Caleb, and he would have loved to know you ended up with Beth and our lovely Holly." At the mention of Caleb's father, Beth felt a tinge of sadness. She wished her parents could have met Caleb and his family. She knew they would have thoroughly approved of him and would have been pleased to know that she had found happiness in the end, even though it hadn't been how she thought it would happen. She always missed them more at Christmas. But this year it felt harder than ever, as so much had changed in her life that they would never know about. As though sensing her melancholy thoughts, Caleb slipped his arm around Beth's waist. "Shall we go and look at where our new home will be?" he murmured. Beth nodded. "Yes, I'd like that. I was just remembering my parents, but I don't want to feel sad today." She wrapped a shawl over her shoulders, and they walked outside. The crisp winter air was redolent with the scent of wood smoke and pine resin as they crunched through the snow toward the barn. The clouds were already gathering, and it looked like they might be in for heavier snowfall before long, but Beth wasn't concerned. Unlike last year, she had a cozy home to shelter in and was with the people she loved. "You've marked it out already?" She looked at the wooden stakes in the ground and chuckled at Caleb. "I've been praying every day that we would get the plot of land, so I figured while I was doing that, I may as well start thinking about how our new home would look." He spread his arms wide, taking in the rolling paddocks and woods. "If we have the cabin this way around, with a veranda along the front, this will be our view. What do you think? 3 bedrooms, of course," he added with a wide smile. "One for us, one for the children, and one spare in case we ever have visitors." Beth's hands went to her thickening waistline, and she felt the faintest kick from deep within her belly from their baby. "I think it will be perfect," she sighed, imagining the horses grazing on the lush summer grass and the sound of children's laughter in the evenings as they all gathered to eat together. "Is there anything that would make it more perfect?" Caleb asked, raising his eyebrows and smiling. "Telling Owen about it," Beth said immediately. "I'm going to try again, Caleb. I think if I write to Vera and some of our old neighbors, I can track him down. I don't want this rift between us to continue. He's the only kin I have left, and I know Ma and Pa would have wanted us to make up." As she leaned against Caleb's chest, Beth became aware of a wagon traveling along the main road. It stopped at the turning to their cabin, and then she saw the driver guiding the horse toward them. "Are we expecting visitors? I thought the pastor and his wife were coming later on." She shielded her eyes against the sun and watched. The wagon was not one she recognized, but there was something about the people on the seat that looked familiar. "I hope you don't mind, but I already wrote to Vera," Caleb said. "I didn't want to tell you in case nothing came of it." "It's Owen?" Beth's happy cry sent the birds clattering into the sky from the nearby tree, and she picked up her skirts to run toward the gateway. "Owen, Vera! I can't believe it's you." A moment later, the visitors jumped down from the wagon and rushed to embrace Beth. "I'm sorry, Beth. Sorry for turning you out of our home and for not taking care of you. Will you ever forgive me?" Owen blinked back tears, and Beth nodded. "Of course. You're my brother, and all I ever wanted was for us to be reconciled. It's all forgotten, Owen. We both made mistakes, but none of that matters now." She looked between Owen and Vera. "I don't understand. How come you're both here? I mean, it's a wonderful surprise, but I didn't realize you knew each other." Vera linked arms with Beth as they all walked toward the cabin. "Owen came looking for you at the haberdashery store, but it was just after you'd left. Back then, he was still angry about you being a mail-order bride, but I think he recognized that it was the drink that was making him that way." "I'd had enough, Beth," Owen chimed in, turning round to face her. He looked shamefaced for a moment. I prayed to the Lord to help me become the sort of person Pa would have wanted me to be, and I turned my back on the drinking with Vera's help. It wasn't always easy, but she never gave up on me. He suddenly looked bashful. You were right about Vera being a kind-hearted person, which is why I asked her to marry me in the summer. We were living in a different area of town by then, Vera said, taking up the story. But one of your old neighbors saw me at the market, and that's how we came to receive Caleb's letter telling us all about your new life and baby Holly. Caleb nodded. I invited them to come to Rocky River, Beth. I hope you don't mind. Beth dried her tears of happiness. This is the best thing I could have wished for, and just in time for Christmas as well. We're having a fresh start, Owen said, taking Vera's hand. The way Caleb described the western frontier towns sounded appealing, so we figured we would find work and stay for a while. I've been studying accounting. Do you think they need men like that in Rocky River? There is no end of opportunities out here, Beth said happily. And for you too, Vera. We could go into dressmaking together, like old times. Well, after the baby's born, maybe. As Margaret and Isabel welcomed Owen and Vera into their home, Beth leaned against Caleb and whispered her thanks to him. You just made a wonderful Christmas even more perfect. Now all the people I love most in the world are all together. Merry Christmas, Beth. I love you and Holly so much. Merry Christmas, Beth replied. Caleb wrapped his arms around Beth and their unborn baby, and together they turned their faces to look up at the sky as the snowflakes started to fall softly all around them. Beth's heart was full of joy and contentment, and she knew there was nowhere she would rather be. Praise be to God for all our blessings, she whispered. The end. Thank you for listening to this free audiobook, and we hope you enjoyed it. Martha Gillcrest writes clean romance stories that sweep you away to when times were simpler with plenty of love and adventure to entertain you. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like it with a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. That way, you will always know when a new audiobook has been added for your listening pleasure.